Dale Ward
God damn
nodded. A number of people have received Double Z threats, said Cardona. Now the way I figure it is this. Calkins may have received that note and kept mum about it. That's hardly likely, huh? Not unless he got it after he went out this afternoon, responded Ward. All right then, maybe he received it then, sent to him by the bird who killed him. Now why did Calkins go to that house on East 80th Street? Probably he got a tip there.
Goddamn.
He knew a lot of gangsters, or perhaps he met someone. Very well. I incline to the first theory. However, he went to the place alone, unarmed, apparently suspecting no danger. There was someone there with him, maybe someone posing as Judge Tolland. Double Z, for instance. Double Z? Exclaimed Ward. Yes, because Calkins was not killed by a gunman. Why not? Gunmen don't bump off reporters, at least not in New York. Besides that, it took 4 shots, and 2 of them were wide ones. Calkins was at the telephone, an easy mark. A gangster would have nailed him with 1 shot or 2 at the most. Ward nodded. He saw Cardona's point. Now get this, declared the detective. Whoever was intending to murder Calkins inside that house gave Calkins the opportunity to spill a certain amount of information. From your description, that information came straight from Calkins. He was not under threat. Calkins had confidence in the man who was with him. Now Judge Tolland, if he is alive, if he is in New York, would certainly want to lay low. At any rate, he would have seen to it that Calkins either said nothing or said everything. That's logical, isn't it? It seems so. But let's figure Double Z on the job, pretending to be Judge Tolland. That wouldn't be difficult. You could double for Tolland, and so could Fenneman here. Nobody's seen Tolland for more than a year. He'd be apt to change his appearance anyway. So we'll consider Double Z a hound for leaving his mark or showing his hand. He gets a phony message to Calkins. The reporter goes up there. He meets Double Z, who calls himself Tolland, and hands him a lot of bunk. Calkins swallows the story. He calls you first.
It looks like you're going to the shadow realm, Jimbo.
Real Kazoo Gaming. Oh my god.
Verbal statement as a new development on the note stuff.
Oh my god, it's the real Kazoo Gaming, not that fake Kaz. I've heard of the fake Kaz. Heard of them. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. They're in the walls.
That guy would never
They're in the
once
wires.
he sent it. Looks like he just left it there after Calkins had brought it out to show him, thinking he was really Judge Tolland. A great story, declared Ward, his journalistic instinct coming to the fore. All right, agreed Cardona. If you leave out the Judge Tolland part. Why? Because we want to keep Double Z from thinking we've got everything. He doesn't know how much was really heard or understood at your end of the phone. He wants to bring in a lot of mystery about Judge Tolland.
How are you doing? I'm doing good. I'm here.
Berserk and is Double Z. That's possible, exclaimed Ward. Possible, yes, said Cardona. But lay off it. Your story's good enough. Calkins was lured to the old house after receiving a threat from Double Z. He went there because someone had tipped him off that he would give him the real lowdown on who Double Z was, and naturally Calkins was anxious
I'm doing good, just listening to my audiobook.
Person, but didn't know it. He called up, started to say something about Double Z, then came the shots, and that's all. Double Z played it right up until the last minute. The city editor became reporter. He began to jot down the theory given by Cardona. This is a break for you, said Fenneman. I wanted to hold back on the note. This Double Z stuff doesn't do us any good. Reference to Tolland would be worse. Right, agreed Ward. He was sold on the capabilities and methods of Joe Cardona. Now, said the detective, I'll be glad to have one of your men come up and look for inside stuff. I've given you what appear to me to be the real facts. Let's stick to them. Keep an eye on what your man writes. I want to nail the guy that got Calkins. That's my job. The city editor of the Classic was thoughtful when he left detective headquarters. He admired the work of Joe Cardona.
I'm doing good, just trying to fix this, make it look good, and then I gotta fix
tabloid ideas.
these.
Joe Cardona was also pleased to have met Dale Ward. He was more pleased when he saw the next day's Classic. along with
So I
photographs
gotta
of the
fix
murdered
that,
reporter
and
the death
then
house,
I was gonna go
appeared
over
the
here,
story
and
that
I
he
was
had
gonna
arranged.
add some
Double
stuff
Z
to
was
it.
in the news again, but now the strange criminal had overshot his mark. The police were obtaining clues. Detective Cardona expected results. Double Z, muttered Joe Cardona as he stared at the newspaper spread upon the desk. I've got the guy's number now. He'll boil up because that Tollin stuff didn't land. He'll show his hand again. And when he does, it'll be too bad for him. Chapter 4. Burke brings action. Burke! Clyde Burke stepped up to the city desk. His eyes met those of Dale Ward. The two men had much in common. Both were journalists of long standing. Burke, formerly a reporter with the defunct Evening Clarion, was now handling special assignments for the tabloid Classic. You've been talking with Harwood about the Wise Owl job, eh? Questioned Ward. Yes, replied Burke. He told me that you had to jam some stuff through for it, but that he wouldn't be able to handle it very long. It occurred to me that perhaps that you would be the man to handle it. Exactly. The city editor laughed. You win, Burke.
But I hope you're doing good, though. Hope everything's been going good. How's everything, little thing?
Pretty friendly with Calkins, weren't you, old man? Clyde nodded. Well, continued Ward.
How's the streaming been going? How's everything been like that?
Reason why I'm going to tell you something that wasn't in today's story.
I know that today is a Friday to Saturday for a lot of people.
Near the city desk. Then he leaned forward and buzzed in Burke's ear. A look of surprise appeared on the reporter's face.
Hey, Heavens.
You mean that he may be in this? That's what Calkins was saying when they got him.
Hey, Heavens.
I'm laying off it for the present, but keep your eye peeled.
Hope you're doing well.
One of three things is sure. First, Ward tapped his left thumb with his right forefinger. Calkins may have seen Tolland and have gotten some real dope from him. Second, the tapped his left forefinger. Double Z bluffed Calkins into thinking he was Tolland. Third, Ward indicated on another finger. Double Z is... Ward did not end the sentence. Clyde Burke finished it for him silently. The reporter's lips framed a single word. Tolland. Right, said the city editor briskly. I'll be on the lookout, declared Clyde. Keep mum, warned Ward. This detective Cardona has the right idea. Double Z is in the mix-up. Keep him guessing. I'll run up to East 18th now, suggested Clyde. Good idea, agreed Ward. Maybe you can trace back over the trail Calkins followed, then get in with the bunch that know. See how they're taking this story we ran today. Clyde Burke sat down at an obscure desk in a corner of the
I'm
newsroom.
good, just getting ready for work. Just redoing some stuff.
Anyone who might have observed him would have decided he was simply adding up his expense account. Clyde Burke looked the part of a police reporter, but this firm-faced young man was engaged in a different task. He was inscribing a note of strange appearance. He was writing a series of coded letters, and the words which those letters formed told the vital facts which he had just heard from the lips of the city editor. Clyde folded the sheet of paper and sealed it in an envelope.
She's got big hair energy. Big hair energy. So you're getting ready for work, okay?
He reached a dilapidated old building.
Okay.
He entered.
Okay.
Inside, he ascended a flight of rickety stairs. He stopped.
You gotta work today? That's lame. That's lame.
Appeared the name B. Jonas.
It's a Saturday, isn't it? Shouldn't you be at home chilling out? Well, you've had so many off days. You're fine.
In fact, no one had ever seen a person enter through that door with the grimy, cobwebbed glass. Yet notes dropped there by Clyde Burke always reached their destination. Clyde was thinking of that destination as he traveled uptown. He knew where his message was going. For the obscure office of B. Jonas was a receiving place used by that mysterious man of the night, the Shadow. Clyde Burke, to the world a newspaper reporter, was actually a trusted agent of this master of crime detection. During the past few months, it had been Clyde's duty to watch for all startling developments in criminal activities. As a police reporter, especially with a tabloid newspaper that hungered for crime news, Clyde was in an excellent position to do this work. Now, with the Wise Owl assignments in his hands, his contact with the underworld was reaching its zenith. He had already gained an insight into the strange facts concerning the death of Joel Calkins, and he had passed his findings on to his mysterious employer. Despite
I work in retail, so I always work a Saturday.
The Shadow during these recent
months. Real Kaz. I haven't taken a shower since yesterday. No.
The Shadow that was as long as this one.
You're a dirty man. Dirty man, Mr. Streamer.
Had the battler of crime
Mr. Streamer.
Had some shrewd gang leader pierced the unfathomable veil that obscured the Shadow and forced him to seek safety outside of New York. These were unpleasant thoughts, but Clyde at times had worse qualms. Perhaps something had happened to the Shadow. For years, gangsters had been trying to put him on the spot. Had they succeeded? The only ray of comfort was the Shadow's broadcasts. Once a week, this man of mystery spoke over the radio, and his uncanny laugh thrilled thousands of eager listeners. The broadcasts were going along on schedule, nevertheless. It was possible that some other man had taken the Shadow's place. No one had ever positively identified the Shadow crime detector with the Shadow radio broadcaster. Various tips on crime that Clyde had dropped in the Jonas office had been apparently ignored, although the reporter had felt sure that the Shadow would respond to them. To date, the Shadow had not, to Clyde's knowledge, taken the slightest
if you've got to go to work, that's okay.
Judge Harvey Tolland, or in the peculiar
that's alright. I'm just tired today. I'm just slightly tired.
The sudden departure of a
but you know me, I'd rather
opinion of Tolland was not likely to interest the Shadow.
I'd rather do this than that.
Hitherto regarded as the epistles of a madman, were also beneath the Shadow's notice.
Hey, board.
Certain deaths. Some had occurred,
I gotta make it
others
loopier.
had not. The few that had transpired had been
round.
Minor gang killings. Never had the hand of Double Z appeared as that of the actual murderer. But now the cry
make
was
make it real fat and round.
A gang killing,
Oof.
and at the same time suggested murderous work on the part of Double Z. Cardona's description of the case as the work of an inexperienced murderer had been played up in the clue. Double Z had become a menace. Clyde Burke anticipated action from the Shadow. He felt sure that the Tolland connection would bring it. With his mind occupied on these
hello, Zara, Heaven and Goat. Hello, board.
He studied the place from across the street. He noticed the heavily curtained front windows of the third floor.
You sound a sleepy goat today. Don't stream too long and get some rest.
The door was
no.
A gruff
no, I want to get done with page 6. Let me get done with page 6. Come on, let me do it. I want to get done with page 6.
Said the officer in an affable tone. Didn't recognize you at first. Want to get in? Sure thing. Wentworth was explaining his presence as they entered the hallway and ascended the stairs. We're keeping watch on this place.
I'm with even on that, Goat. It's gotta get done.
He just enough to come back to the place. Might have left something here, so we're lying in wait. Wentworth unlocked the door of the third floor apartment. He and Burke entered the gloomy room where Calkins had died. The detective pointed to the telephone and indicated the position in which the body had been found. Who lived here? Wish we knew, said Wentworth. Name downstairs says Joseph T. Dodd, but we haven't had any clue from it. We do know that some fellow did live here for a while. We found.
Hey, Bull, give me the tranquilizer. He won't take nappies without some encouragement.
Nothing here in the way of identification. Clyde looked around the room while the detective kept up a line of intermittent patter. The supposed actions that had taken place in the room were well established in Wentworth's mind. Calkins came in, he explained. He found the guy who had coaxed him in here. They were talking about this Double Z stuff. Calkins went to the phone, right there. The other bird was standing here. Just as Calkins began to spill the story, The other fellow outs with a gat and plugs him 4 times. Calkins didn't have a chance, even though the guy that killed him was a bum shot. Right here is where the figure the murderer was standing. Nervy, eh? While Calkins was phoning? Clyde nodded. Somehow Wentworth's description, a duplicate of Cardona's findings, did not fully satisfy him. Yet he could not explain what was wrong. He and the detective left the house. Clyde grunted a goodbye and started back to the newspaper office. On the way, he stopped at the building on 23rd Street. Standing in the dim hall, he scrawled a short, coded message describing his visit to 80th Street, and dropped the note in the door that bore the name Jonas. Before the desolate-looking house on East 80th Street, Detective Sergeant Wentworth
they never make it easy.
Vigil. Dusk came. The door of the old
Never
house
tell me the odds. Never tell me the odds. April! Too late. My time has come. Sid shivers down my spine. Body's aching all of the time. Goodbye, everybody. Gotta go. Gotta leave you all behind.
Wentworth went back to his
Mama,
post. As his footsteps clicked down the stone steps to the sidewalk, a low laugh sounded in the vestibule. The soft mirth did not reach Wentworth's ears. A man was standing in the vestibule. A man clad in black. He was totally invisible in the darkness. He had entered the front door in spite of the detective's vigil. Now a light appeared in the enclosure. A tiny spot of light no larger than $50. It shone directly upon the lock of the inner door. A queer-looking key appeared within that circle of illumination. A black-gloved hand used the key to probe the lock. The door opened. It did not close immediately. The man in black was still working at the lock. The key moved in and out as though being used to probe the metal depths. At last, the door closed. Silence reigned with darkness. The light shone at intervals, moving upward on the stairway. It stopped on the 3rd floor. Its rays swinging pryingly, stopped at the very spot where Joel Calkins had stood in the hallway, unobserved by the man he was following. The tiny light, close to the floor, revealed slight dust marks. Metal clicked against metal. The door of the apartment opened. The ray of the flashlight widened as it advanced uncannily, not a foot above the floor.
Every time there's something.
An invisible trail.
When violence doesn't solve, add some violence. Ooh,
the door of the side room in which Calkins had hidden himself. Next, the light swung around the room and aimed downward to reveal the carpet. The floor covering was cheap and plain. It showed wear near the door and by the table. There was another spot where it was worn. The flashlight paused at that place, then moved upward. Its light glinted back from the silvered surface of the mirror that hung on the wall. After a pause, the light went to the table. It moved busily about. It showed the telephone, off slightly to one side, and the chair placed at an angle. It examined the far side of the table and the floor beside it. There in the carpet was a tiny stain. The light
every time
probing the carpet. It revealed another small, dark splotch.
Hate it.
Then it went down the stairs,
dislike it so much.
Stopping to note some trifling sign. It reached the vestibule and made a thorough search. Here were no splotches, only a broad smear in the midst of a dust-streaked floor. The light was tiny now, as it ran up the side of the wall and stopped on the name of Joseph T. Dodd. Then the light went out. The front door opened softly, and a thin figure slipped through to merge with the thickening night. Wentworth became suddenly alert across the street. He fancied that he had seen another motion at the door of the house. Then he laughed at his imagination. Why should he be concerned with every fleeting shadow that might appear before that door? He was posted to watch for a living being, not a phantom. And so when Wentworth ended his vigil, being relieved by a plainclothes man, he made out a simple report, namely that no one had visited the house that day, with the exception of Clyde Burke, reporter for the Classic. His report said nothing of a shadow in the dusk. If it had, it might have attracted the attention of the observant Joe Cardona, for the star detective knew more about shadows than did Wentworth. Joe Cardona, alone of the New York detective force, might have suspected the truth, that the shadow, living phantom of the night, had come and gone at the old house on East 80th Street. In answer to Clyde Burke's messages, the strange man of darkness had investigated the spot where Joel Calkins had died. Silently, invisibly, the shadow had learned facts which had escaped the observation of Joe Cardona, and those facts pertained to other than Joel Calkins, namely Judge Harvey Toland, and to the man known only as Double Z. Chapter 5. Cardona Encounters Crime. Detective Joe Cardona was a man who played hunches. For months, he had been thinking off and on of Double Z. He had classed the man as an eccentric individual who knew the inside of crookdom and liked to display his knowledge by letters to the police. He had harbored a hunch that Double Z might someday become dangerous, and he had been waiting for that time. Now the day had come. The murder of Joel Calkins indicated action on the part of Double Z. It enabled Cardona to form his impression of what type of man Double Z might be. He pictured him as one of those characters who fringe the borders of the underworld, perhaps a fence who disposed of stolen goods. Through contact with crime, the man had gained knowledge. Now, possessed of more intelligence than the average criminal, the lure of crime had caused him to enter the field himself, while his eccentricity still made him follow his old practice of writing letters to the police. Cardona recalled that 2 of Double Z's veiled tips of impending death had failed to materialize. Some months ago, he had said that a gangster was to be put on the spot within a week. The killing had not occurred. Then he had
What's the
hinted
problem
also at the
now?
kidnapping of a prominent society
Nothing.
woman. The police had become vigilant. The abduction
Nothing's the
had
problem.
not taken place.
Just
These,
tired.
therefore, were indications that Double Z had known of crime,
Just very
but
slightly
had not
tired.
planned them. On the contrary, most of his statements had proven true. 3 unsolved murders had been predicted by Double Z. In one case, he had been of aid to the police. He had told of a plot to assassinate Signor Galvini, Italian plenipotentiary to the United States. His note had been turned over to the Secret Service. They had forestalled bomb throwing on the part of anti-fascists, but had not discovered the men higher up. A few lesser criminals had gone to jail. Joe Cardona was not a man to place too much faith in impressions. Doubts lurked in his brain when he tried to identify Double Z as a definite personality. Some smart crook might be using this guise for some unknown purpose. But despite his suspicion of impressions, Cardona had a weakness for hunches. The first had materialized. Double Z had committed crime and had shown himself to be shrewd, but bungling. He had lured Joel Calkins, and had then required 4 shots to kill him, thus proving that Double Z was not so good when it came to gunplay. Perhaps, Cardona speculated, Double Z might be an old man. While the detective still doubted his own impressions, he had experienced another hunch, and in that he had no doubt. He felt positive that Double Z, once a killer, would now enter crime with boldness. It was because of this hunch that Wentworth had been placed on watch. The house on 80th Street might be a hideout for Double Z, masquerading under the name of Joseph T. Dodd. If so, he might return there. Cardona was sure that the killer would soon be heard from, and awaited that time. That was why the detective registered no surprise when he arrived at headquarters at noon to find Acting Inspector Finneman anxiously awaiting him. This was on the day after the Shadow's secret visit to the old house, 2 days after the murder of Joel Calkins. "What is it?" questioned Cardona when he saw the inspector. "More on Double Z?" "You guessed it, Joe. He sent in another note." "Here?" "No. To Philip Farmington, the big banker, a direct threat. Read this." Cardona received a paper. Its words were poorly typewritten. The detective recognized the battered M and the weakly struck A. Double Z sometimes scrawled. On other occasions he typed. Always he inscribed at the foot of the note those twin letters that served as his signature. The message read, "You are making a mistake. Stop at once, or you will hear from me. Death will come to you.
I have entered crime with italics. Bold is too obvious.
Where did Farmington get this?
True.
Was his question.
True.
This morning, replied the acting inspector. Sent it down by messenger. Called up to make sure it came in. I told him you would come up to see him. He'll be home at 1 o'clock. Joe Cardona glanced at his watch. I know where Farmington lives, he said. I'll go up there right away.
It's just all this extra stuff that I gotta do. I gotta do this, all this chain mail.
Cardona took a chair near a huge mahogany desk and awaited the
put it on right here, put it right here, put it right here.
Joe Cardona was interested in the meeting.
So thank you guys for hanging out with me and chilling out, or even just a little bit.
Was a keen, hard-faced individual, one who possessed a powerful physique and a commanding personality. Cardona knew that he was reputed to be a multi-millionaire and was a strong figure in the activities of international bankers. After shaking hands with the detective, Farmington seated himself by the desk and got down to business. He opened a box of cigars that was on the desk. Cardona accepted one. Farmington was already smoking. Well, asked Farmington, what do you think of this Double Z matter? The man is crazy, declared Cardona. Nevertheless, he is dangerous. Unquestionably, acknowledged the banker. Not only dangerous, but methodical. I see a purpose in his threat. What is it? He knows that I understand this message. I've already replied to it. What? You know where he is? No, smiled Farmington. I've replied by action, knowing what is in his mind. Cardona appeared puzzled, but waited without asking questions. For some time, continued the millionaire, a group with which I am associated has been considering a loan to the fascist government. The matter awaited my decision. Today, the letter arrived while I was at breakfast. I took it with me to the office.
Post Millionaire is actually impressive, even though that's not how that works. Of course he's a thick-headed douche cannon. No way.
So
couldn't believe it.
He is watching. Knows now that I have failed to heed his instructions. Said Cardona. You have any previous indication of this? No, replied Farmington. When did you announce your decision would be made today? The millionaire chewed the end of his half-finished cigar, then threw the perfecto into a tubular ash receiver. He arose and paced the floor in thought. At last he turned to face Detective Cardona. It has been known, he said, that my decision regarding the loan might be made within a few weeks, but yesterday I made an announcement indicating that I would reach a definite decision today. A number of my friends were here last night. They'd seen the announcement in the newspapers. I stated that it was correct, for I had definitely made up my mind. Did you speak to anybody else about it? Yes, to reporters who called up while my friends were here. They wanted to corroborate the announcement for the morning newspapers. Cardona puffed his cigar and became thoughtful. Philip Farmington noted that the detective was considering the matter minutely. He decided to assist him. Suppose, he said, that I tell you everything that has happened since I gave the announcement to the evening newspapers yesterday.
There we go,
replied the detective. Well, said the millionaire, they'd been questioning me constantly.
Of course he's a big douche. Douche knows.
At noon yesterday, I received a call from the Evening Sphere. It was the usual call, any decision planned on the fascist loan. I said that it would probably be settled favorably today. I came home before 3 o'clock. I was in this room until nearly 6. Then I dressed for dinner. About 12 persons arrived before 7:30. We had dinner, and the guests departed between 10 and 11 o'clock. When did the newspapers call you on the phone? Before 9 o'clock. When did you discuss the matter with your friends? It was mentioned during dinner. Did anything unusual happen during the evening? No, we were in the living room most of the time. A few of the gentlemen came in here, but after we had gone out, I locked the door. I don't usually keep this room open. It serves me as an office at home. I explained that to them. I never come in here in the morning. The room is
trying to think of like what that is.
Then, at dinner time, I lock up until the next day. The room was open when I came, said Cardona. Of course.
I just fucking erase that because I don't.
Ralph, the butler, has a duplicate key. I called from the office and told him to show you in here. I see. Now, regarding this note of Double Z, according to the postmark, it was mailed from the Bronx about midnight. Yes, I noticed that. All of the notes came from the Bronx. The detective hesitated. That may mean something. It may also be a blind. One thing is for certain.
People can't handle me having my money. I'm not crazy. They're crazy. Who put this blood here? Punch my wood.
Yes.
Later.
All threats?
I'll punch it later.
Few or tips. One in particular enable us to forestall a plot against the fascist delegate to America. That is why the note addressed to you is both right and wrong. How? Because, said Cardona, we've connected Double Z with fascisti matters. That fits in. But previously he seemed to favor the Italian government. Now, however, if your idea is correct, he opposes it. Most peculiar. Yes, but Double Z is eccentric. Don't forget that. I'll tell you what I want to do, Mr. Farmington. I'm going to take notes of everything you've told me, just in case there may be a clue somewhere in it. This may be dangerous business.
This may be dangerous,
Farmington emphatically. Nevertheless, we must capture this scoundrel. Make your notes and I shall check them. Farmington sat down at the desk and leaned back in the large chair. Cardona began to make notations, exactly following the statements which the millionaire gave him. While Cardona was at work, Farmington unlocked a lower drawer of the desk and opened a cigar box. He brought out a cigar and cut off the cud. He flipped the bit of tobacco to the ash receiver and lighted his cigar in a methodical manner. I don't recall your telling me about this morning, remarked the detective. You went directly to the office? Yes, after an 8 o'clock breakfast. When did the conference begin? At 9:30. When did it end? 10:15. And the evening newspapers were notified immediately. Did anything happen after that? Farmington chewed the end of his cigar as he reflected. He was leaning back in his chair, and Cardona noted the firmness of his profile. Nothing else, came Farmington's reply. All right, declared the detective. I'll read all my notes. Afterward, we can see if we've missed anything. He began in a monotonous tone. Occasionally, he looked up to see if Philip Farmington was listening. The millionaire had turned away slightly, so his profile was no longer visible. His head was leaning back. His hand was resting on the desk, holding the cigar. Cardona went on until he finished reading. He waited for Farmington to finish considering it. At last, Cardona's patience ended. Anything else? He questioned. Philip Farmington.
I also had to take off Rick Astley.
Satisfactory? Questioned Cardona. No reply. Surprised, Cardona
So no
frowned.
more Rick rolling me.
Stepped toward the
I know it's sad, but
he advanced only 3 paces. He stopped stock still.
No more of the Rick roll.
To move farther forward.
I know it's very sad. I know even people would probably be like, well, I guess I'm done with this channel. That's the only reason I came.
Philip Farmington was staring at the wall with glazed, wide-open eyes. Upon his face had come a grayish pallor that matched the thin wisp of cigar smoke which curled upward from the hand upon the desk. The firm features of the millionaire had taken a ghastly appearance that Cardona had never before observed upon the face of any man. Startled, the detective stood motionless. Then, while a
never gonna give you up. I don't want to go to school. Neither do I. Never gonna let you down. Squeaky wheel gets a kick.
The firm clutch brought results. The millionaire's body gave way beneath the pressure. It slumped down into the chair. The arms dropped lifelessly, and the lighted cigar rolled upon the floor. The head with the staring eyes fell back, and the gruesome gaze turned unseeingly toward the ceiling. A deep gasp came from Detective Joe Cardona. Philip Farmington was dead. Chapter 6. The Shadow Prepares. The strange death of Philip Farmington, millionaire international banker, was tremendous news. The circumstances under which it had occurred in the presence of Detective Joe Cardona during a discussion of the mysterious Double Z brought stern realization to both police and press. It was obvious that a man who had previously dealt only in eccentricities had now become a shrewd, insidious killer. What? Who was Double Z? Was he a gangster who had suddenly given up the usual undercover methods of crime? Was he a tool of someone higher up, a blind to mislead police investigators? Was he a maniac who knew the ways of the underworld, who after contenting himself with writing his eccentric letters, had now launched into a career of murder and thievery? Was he a supermind, a criminal who had been waiting for the right opportunity to begin murder and destruction? Was he a man entirely unknown in
I desert you.
developed
Yeah.
criminal tendencies?
Yeah,
Was he
it's
a former
copyright
agent
claimed
bent
me on
campaigning
YouTube.
terrorism with New York as its center? These
It's
questions
copyright
remained
claimed me
unanswered.
multiple times on YouTube, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess no more.
Or more of these classifications.
No
These
more copyright
paradoxical
claim.
actions and
There was also
unexplainable
another claim,
purposes
but it
marked
was
him either
because
as a person
Timesuck
who obeyed a criminal
played
impulse,
a
or as
song
man gifted with
on
remarkable
Timesuck,
genius.
and
In
I'm like,
either
you
event,
sons of
the police
bitches.
had but one course: to track
Oh,
down
well.
this slayer before he loosed his evil powers throughout a wider range. Everywhere one went, the talk was of Double Z. This was particularly evident at the exclusive Cobalt Club, where Philip Farmington had been a prominent member. The death of this international banker had cast a pall over the spirits of his friends. The Cobalt
It's because
Club was a
troll
gloomy
company,
place at best.
companies,
Now,
yeah,
for once,
true.
its members were loquacious,
But
their
I'm not,
talk was
I'm
morbid.
not fighting
The
it.
death of Philip Farmington presaged future threats directed at other men of wealth. A small, tense group was discussing the matter in the club lounge. Half a dozen men had gathered
know.
together. Barnaby Hotchkiss, the lumber magnate, was speaking. "Looks like an international plot," he said emphatically. "The anti-fascists are bad
It does
enough, but
sound
the Bolsheviks
like
are mixed in it. Might
some
be
troll
troublesome for
company
you,
though.
eh?" quizzed
Agreed.
William Glover, the famous steamship man.
I just don't want to fight it.
Yes,
It's not that
admitted
big of a deal.
Hotchkiss.
It's just a copyright claim on one small thing.
That cheap Bolshevik lumber was a menace. They've stopped a lot of it now. They don't like it in Moscow.
Right.
I don't think this can go far.
Yeah,
said
it's
William
like,
Glover optimistically.
I don't
There's
even
nothing to
make
be gained by
money
attacking
on
individuals.
YouTube.
Look at it from
Like,
Farmington's
you're
viewpoint.
not really
Hotchkiss
doing
put in
anything. You
sourly.
didn't do
Well,
anything.
Farmington's dead. Yeah,
You just...
that's just the trouble.
Now, if
Who'd
I
be
was a bigger
next?
streamer
words brought
and
nods of
people
understanding
watched my
from other
full
members of the
streams
group.
and stuff like that, and they were
Notice
like, yeah,
from
no,
some
I love
Stephen Baum, the
watching
chain store
Goat's
director.
full streams
If
here.
this crazy man sets out to kill, they cannot stop him. How is Farmington murdered? Poisoned, declared Glover. They discovered that right away. I read the report of the toxicologist in tonight's Sphere. Yes, but who administered the poison? How? Where? Glover shrugged his shoulders. They haven't figured that out yet, he said. I believe they've discovered the nature of the poison, declared Matthew Wade, the multimillionaire. That at least.
But
is one step in
YouTube
the
don't
right
want
direction.
to
How does
share.
that
Oh,
help?
you're
asked
absolutely
Hotchkiss.
chopped liver on
Certain
that platform
poisons
if
are
you're
approved in
just
certain countries,
reposting
said
from
Wade.
here. Anywho,
This one, from the
I
description
mean,
I've read,
yeah.
resembles a very virulent,
Yeah,
lethal
that's
used
life.
poison found in India. I heard of such a poison during my last visit to Bombay when I was cruising around the world on
I
your
mean,
ships.
I guess I'm chopped
I think
liver.
you're mistaken there, Wade. Came a
C'est
quiet
la
voice.
vie.
The
Well, I'm
speaker
just putting
was
it on
Lamont
there
Cranston,
just
like Wade,
just
a
so
gentleman
people
of
can't
leisure,
be
reputed
like,
to
oh, you
possess
didn't do
great
that.
wealth.
Like it's
I've never been
extra
heard of poisons.
copyright
I've studied them.
protection.
Farmington's death
So like
indicates
if
that he
people are
tasted
like,
poison
well,
similar to the
no,
niche
I
shrimp,
did this,
a
and it's
typical
like,
Mongolian.
I literally
It's supposed to
have
affect immediately,
video
and it
evidence
does.
of me
It is
drawing
extremely rapid.
my entire
Matthew
comic.
Wade shrugged his
We
shoulders.
can go
He
through
was a
this.
indolent man who had inherited much of his money and who had spent long periods of time in foreign
Like
countries.
basically,
He
it's
was not
just
one to
there as
discuss
like
technicalities,
if someone's
although he
like,
had a
oh,
somewhat challenging
you didn't
disposition.
draw this.
I'll
Yeah,
take your word
okay,
for it, Cranston,
all
he
right.
replied.
Here you
I
go.
guess you've traveled as
Here's
much
the
as I have.
video.
I spent most of
The
my time on
entire-
big game hunts in
The
India. I was
entire
too busy to
video
study the
right
Oriental
here.
methods of artistic assassination. The group was breaking up. Some of the men started toward the billiard room, others toward the lobby. Lamont Cranston remained in the lounge.
Goddamn
He seated
Cranston.
himself in a comfortable chair and turned to observe a man who was sitting nearby. This individual had not been taking part in the discussion. The man whom Cranston surveyed was a sober, quiet-faced chap in his 30s. He was dressed in evening clothes. He was smoking a panatella in a methodical manner, and seemed very much concerned with his own thoughts. He alone seemed to reflect the usual atmosphere of the Cobalt Club. The only expression on his face was a look of glumness that seemed to be habitual. It disappeared suddenly when the man
Oh, definitely save your stuff physically, sure. I like watching them if I have to leave the stream early.
Of the millionaire, and spoke words of greeting.
Don't announce you intend to make that motion, or someone would flag all your videos prior to boot. Yeah, no, I know.
Man,
no, I know. I know how it works.
Ah, yes, exclaimed Cranston. I remember now.
Just to all my viewers of like, hey, I've got a way to protect myself. Do have a way to protect myself.
I don't belong in the plutocrat class.
Like, don't you worry.
Was studious. Despite his pretense, he had recognized Rutledge Man. Moreover, he knew a great deal of his history.
And copyright claim does not stop the video from existing. The copyright claim only stops it from being monetized, which is very different.
Not so good, eh? Questioned Cranston.
And also, those eventually go away. The thing about copyright claims is that they go away.
It's too bad, observed Cranston. There was an understanding in his tone that impressed.
Like, if they don't keep going back to those videos, I'm like,
No, Man replied. I'd do anything to get started again. I owe a lot of debts. If it wasn't for that, he stopped abruptly. Although he never ended the
I just don't get these people.
Inferred the rest. The peculiar flicker that appeared on Man's face told him all.
I'm obviously not like, this is, oh man, this is my main source of income. Like, I don't fucking get, what if it was my main source of income? Like, who the fuck are you?
Table drawer of his apartment. Man did not notice that Cranston was still watching him. Had he been alerted,
because it doesn't tell me who these people are.
For Cranston's sharp eyes were focused keenly on the face of the ex-broker. He seemed to be reading the innermost thoughts of the man beside him. Rutledge Man arose from his chair. He glanced at the clock that showed through the door from the lobby. That action was significant to Lamont Cranston. He knew that Man must have pawned the expensive.
Oh, that's so sweet of you, Heathen.
Nights before, for Lamont Cranston had been secretly observing Rutledge Man for a considerable period of time. Good night, said Man.
Like, I don't get these people. Like, what's the MO?
He left the lounge and
like, is it just because you're bored and you've got, you know, problems at home or something like that?
Possessed was the full dress suit which he donned for his evening visits to the club.
Does it give you a chub every time you do it? It's just a question.
It was several blocks to the subway station, yet he ignored the taxi cabs waiting at the door of the club. He did this for a good reason. He had only 50 cents in his pocket. Man chided himself as he strode along, particularly when a taxi cab swinging away from the entrance of the Cobalt Club splattered past him. Accustomed to surroundings of wealth, the club had been his only haven during the past few months. He spent most of his time there, but felt strangely out of place. With men like Lamont Cranston, for instance, or Matthew Wade, to either of them $1,000 was pin money. Yet tonight, Rutledge Man would have sacrificed anything for half that sum. The drizzle had become a torrent when Man emerged from the subway station near the apartment house where he lived. 2 blocks through the deluge. He made it on the run. He entered his apartment dripping wet. He threw his coat in the closet and surveyed the ruin of his evening clothes. He hung the coat up to dry, placed the vest over the back of a chair, and pulled away his tie and collar. He sat down in front of the table, acting on sudden impulse. He pulled open the table drawer and picked up the gun. It was the only item of any value which still belonged to him. Should he pawn it, or... The gun was in his left hand. Man was staring, fascinated, into the gleaming muzzle. Instinctively, his fingers sought the trigger. He seemed in a little world of his own, within the circled glare of the table lamp.
Money.
Even the rest of the room about him.
My friend got copyright claimed against a song that he wrote. Oh yeah. There
Then,
are people
from
out there that do that,
wall
like
came a
some
black-clad hand that
bullshit.
plucked the automatic from his grasp. Man stared upward to find himself facing a tall being who seemed a fantastic specter come from nowhere. The visitor was clad entirely in black. He wore a long black cloak with a high collar that obscured his face. Over his forehead was the broad brim of a slouch hat. 2 eyes were all that man could see, eyes that glowed like sparkling coals. The automatic disappeared beneath the folds of the black cloak. Man, astounded and empty-handed, was unable to even gasp his surprise.
Why do you seek death?
Its uncanny tones made man shudder, yet he felt no fear because of the stranger's presence. "There's nothing to live for," he replied. "I'm broke.
They all want
No
money.
friends, no future. No one depends on me. I've reached the end, that's all. I hold off." A black-gloved hand advanced. The gun was replaced in man's grasp. Man felt that he was dreaming, that his harassed mind had fancied all this. The touch of the cold metal brought reality. But he held the gun loosely, his thoughts of suicide temporarily forgotten.
If you have good reasons for death,
Came the whispered voice.
I shall not deny you the privilege. But if all you need is money and friendship to make life worth continuing, they are yours, if you do my bidding.
Man laid the gun on the table. He stared straight at the man in black. "What do you ask?" he inquired.
Obedience. Full obedience. Without question. You will have life and honor, but my bidding shall be law.
Silence. Man stared at the strange figure, seeking to observe the hidden lips that had spoken those all-important words. He was thinking of the future. Which would it be? His body, lifeless in this chair? Or Rutledge man, alive and active, freed from poverty? It all seemed unreal, but he treated it with seriousness. "I
So what do they
accept
want?
your
They
offer,"
want money.
was man's spoken
They
decision
want
as he stared
money.
into those glowing eyes.
You promise full obedience.
"I promise." A black-gloved hand placed something upon the table beside the automatic. Man looked at the object. It was a checkbook. He opened it. The checks bore the imprint, Rutledge Man, 909 Badger Building, New York.
Be at your office tomorrow morning.
Came the whispered voice from beside him. Projecting from the end of the checkbook was a deposit book. Man drew it out and opened it. At the top of the first column was the statement of a deposit of $2,500. Man wheeled in his chair to face the stranger. He saw no one. He leaped to the door and pressed the wall switch. He was alone. The man in black had gone. He stepped swiftly back to the table. In one hand he held the pistol, in the other the checkbook. One meant death, the other life, a life worth living. He put the automatic into the table drawer. He sat staring at the checkbook as a man in a dream, while the minutes ticked by. When morning arrived, Rutledge Man saw the checkbook on his bureau, where he had placed it before retiring. It amused him even
Go
now to
here.
find that it was real. The strange events of last
Let's
night were dim
transform.
recollections. Man could not repress the suspicion that he had been hoaxed. He dressed, left his apartment, and hurried downtown to the Badger Building near Times Square. He went up to the 9th floor and found Office 909. There he stood stupefied. On the door was the gilt lettering, Rutledge Man, Investments. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Within he found a small office, beyond it a door and an inner office. On the desk of the private office lay 2 objects, a key and an envelope. Man sat before the desk. He opened the envelope and extracted a folded paper. He began to read, and with reading came understanding. While Rutledge Man was gaining his first insight into the methods of the mysterious man who had
Copy
befriended
this.
him, Another man who had business in New York was opening a letter at his breakfast table in his home in New Jersey. This was Cliff Marsland, a veteran of the World War, who had done his part in a recent campaign against the New York racketeers. The letter which Cliff read was written in blue ink, and its words formed a private code which only he understood. Scarcely had he finished reading when the writing began to disappear. The paper was blank when Cliff dropped it on the breakfast table. "Darling," he said to his wife, "I think it'd be a good idea for you to take that Florida trip with your father, so plan to leave with him tonight. I have work to do that may take me away for a while." Meanwhile, in the club car of the Eastern Limited, a young man known as Harry Vincent was smoking a cigar and staring meditatively at the passing scenery. Harry had terminated his vacation early that morning. He had left his parents' home in the little town of Colon and was riding east from Michigan in response to an oddly worded telegram
You lack a
which
car?
he had received the night before.
Going to be quiet for a
which he
bit,
alone
walking
could
for bus. Oh
understand.
man.
And at precisely the
Do you
same
lack
moment,
a car?
Clyde Burke was hanging up the receiver of the
Yes.
telephone at the
I
classic
still lack a
office.
car.
He had just been listening to the words of
I
a
still
quiet
lack a
voice that had
vehicle
spoken to him
until
over the wire. "Burbank," Clyde Burke said in an undertone.
until hopefully Monday. Hopefully Monday they'll accept the offer for the van, and that'll be all right.
Simultaneously, the Shadow, the unknown master of mystery, had summoned his underlings, each to await his commands. While the police, with hundreds at their disposal, were blindly seeking to learn the identity of Double Z, the Shadow had prepared for battle with a newcomer in the world of crime.
Yes. Yes. Okay.
Chapter 7. The Shadow at Work. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, a man called at detective headquarters and inquired for Joe Cardona. He was taken into the detective's office. Cardona was out, but he arrived half an hour later to find the visitor awaiting him. He looked quizzically at the stranger, a tall, sallow-faced man who wore a blue serge suit and brown slouch hat. Cardona had never seen the man before, but he was impressed by the fellow's appearance. The man's face was firm and expressionless. It seemed molded from a solid substance. Before the detective could inquire the stranger's business, the man arose and drew back the left side of his coat to reveal a badge of the Secret Service. Cardona extended a hand in greeting. "Blake is my name," said the visitor in a quiet voice. "Terry Blake. You wouldn't suspect it from the name, but..." He paused and broke into a smooth-flowing conversation of Italian. Cardona, surprised, answered in the same tongue. After a few more remarks, Blake resumed his conversation in English. He had just explained to Cardona that he was of Italian ancestry on his mother's side of the family. Cardona, noting his features closely, observed certain prominent characteristics of that race. "I suppose you want to see me about the Farmington case," remarked Cardona. "You guessed it," replied the Secret Service man. "I'm working on these anti-fascist operations. It looks pretty much like this case fits in." "No doubt about it," declared Cardona. "There's only one hitch. The method."
But yes, I am just
"Bombs and stilettos are in their line."
just
he said.
making
"This poison
this,
business is
and then
a
I'm
new-
gonna do
not
this.
exactly new.
It's the
Observed
little
Secret
things
Service
on
man.
here.
"No?" came the surprised reply. "Italy," said Blake, "was famous for the Medicis. I've seen the survival of some of their subtle poisons. The art's faded, but it's not dead." "I can't see the connection," declared Cardona. "Any knowledge of poisons in Italy would belong to members of the aristocracy, some of whom still have criminal leanings, but the anti-fascists are a communistic group." "You think so?" interrupted the Secret Service man with a thin, slow smile. "You should pay a visit to Rome. You'd find it different from New York. In Rome, the fascisti are a middle group hated by the communists and secretly despised by the aristocracy. The activities against the fascisti are not confined to the lower classes." Cardona nodded thoughtfully. I get your drift, he said. Here in New York, we have only the bomb throwers and that type, but in this case, with international affairs at stake, it may be that a more elaborate plot has been arranged. I regard it as possible, declared Blake. We haven't had much luck on the poison, lamented Cardona. The toxicologist has found out its general nature, but he can't place it. He figures it works slowly at first, then suddenly. That gives us no help. It might have been given to Farmington at lunch, in the morning, as early as breakfast. Or the night before. No, that would have been impossible. Not earlier than the morning. Even then, not too early. What clues have you discovered? None. Cardona tossed a typewritten report to the Secret Service man. It was a record of the detective's
I'm just cleaning your fluff butt, that's all. Big rabbit. Poor big rabbit. He's so little and bitty.
Quiz. Any documents? None of importance. Suppose we go up there, suggested the Secret Service man. All right, agreed Cardona. Here's something you'd like to look at before you go. He brought out the note which Philip Farmington had received from Double Z. The Secret Service man examined it closely. You sure it's bona fide? Was his question. Cardona produced other letters. For fully 10 minutes, Terry Blake studied and compared the letters. He laid all aside except the note which had been found in the hand of Joel Calkins, the note which warned the recipient he had but 1 week to live. The Secret Service man turned the note sideways, then upside down. He returned it to Cardona. The detective almost fancied that he saw a sudden gleam in Blake's eyes. Before he could ask a question, the Secret Service man had arisen. Let's go, he said brusquely. They reached Philip Farmington's home. Cardona had a key to the office where the banker had died. The men entered. Blake examined the chair in which Farmington had been seated. Cardona smiled. We went over all that, he said. No poison needles. Not a clue here, old fellow, but I thought you'd like to look at these papers. Terry Blake examined some documents that had belonged to Philip Farmington. Finally, he laid them aside and sat in the chair before the desk. Farmington was sitting here, he asked. Yes, Cardona took the chair he had occupied on that other occasion. I was over here, talking to him. What did he do? Very little. Offered me a cigar when he came in, and that box on the desk. Good. I'll be Farmington. Have one. Cardona accepted the perfecto with a smile. Blake began to take one for himself. Wait, said Cardona, entering into the game. Farmington took one from the desk drawer. I remember it at the time. I found out later he prefers a strong brand of pure Havana. Blake opened the drawer indicated. It had been left unlocked. He found the box of cigars. One layer was gone. A single cigar was out of the second layer. Blake fished a cigar loose and bit off the tip. Farmington cut off the end, observed Cardona. I remember he took a cutter from his pocket, flipped the tip away. Never mind, replied the Secret Service man. He lighted the cigar. The pungent odor caused Cardona to sniff. Strong, all right, said the detective. Funny I didn't notice it yesterday. Guess I was too busy taking notes. So Farmington was sitting here when he died. Right there. It beats me, admitted Blake. We've got a tough crime to solve. Well, we'll be cooperating. His hat was lying on the desk. He accidentally knocked it on the floor as he arose. Cardona saw him stoop to pick it up. They left the room and rode downtown in a cab. Blake dropped off before they reached headquarters. In his office, Joe Cardona found a short, stocky man awaiting him. The stranger introduced himself as Tim Malloy of the Secret Service. What? Exclaimed Cardona. I just left one of your men.
Like I'm a bunny.
Terry Blake.
You
Malloy
have
scratched
to
his
love
head
me.
speculatively.
Bunny stuff.
Terry Blake, he said. I thought he was in Italy. What did he look like? Cardona described Blake. Well, that sounds like Blake, declared Malloy.
Fresh.
Didn't know he was back. Funny he wasn't reported. The subject was dropped. Malloy asked to see the Double Z
Also remember to
correspondence.
save.
Cardona produced it. That was all Malloy required. After the government man was gone, Cardona wondered. Funny thing, he thought, that Terry Blake should have come.
I know Zara Unity Master is probably
that visit to Farmington
is streaming right now.
Malloy had suggested no such visit. Suspicions began to enter Joe Cardona's mind. He was on the verge of another hunch. He stared from the window at the gathering dusk and felt that he would like to meet Mr. Terry Blake once again. Had Cardona's gaze been able to pierce both blackness and solid walls, he might have viewed a distant scene which would have surprised him. It would also have explained, in part, the visit of the man who called himself Terry Blake. A light was shining in the midst of a windowless room. Its rays, focused downward by an opaque lampshade, cast a luminous circle in the center of a square-topped table. Within that sphere of light, two hands were moving. Those hands were long, slender, and tapering, yet strong muscles were apparent beneath their smooth-textured skin. Upon a finger of the left hand, a strange gem glowed beneath the lamplight, its bluish depths changing in hue from purple to deep red. The stone was a girasol, a rare fire opal unmatched in all the world. It was the lone jewel of the shadow. Objects appeared as if from nowhere. A pencil and a piece of paper, a small goblet filled with water, a tiny box, a vial of dark blue liquid whose changing shades rivaled the matchless girasol. These appeared from the outer darkness, arriving within the circle of light as though conjured from space. Finally, a curious book with flexible covers made its appearance. The hands opened the book.
I swear cars are becoming a luxury. It feels like it.
A pointed finger made its way up the page. It stopped and moved slowly from character to character. Eyes in the dark were reading from the book.
Feels almost like it.
The pencil from the table and made short notations upon the sheet of paper. The book remained open, but was pushed to one side where
tiny box, not a big box, a tiny box,
and shook a quantity of yellow powder into the little goblet of water. The liquid took on a yellowish tinge, the powder dissolving immediately. The hands produced an envelope, also a small pair of tweezers. The metal prongs were dipped into the envelope. They came out carrying a small brown object between their tips. It was the end of a cigar, which had been clipped off with a cigar cutter. The tweezers were dipped into the yellowish liquid. Half a minute went by, then the hand that held the tweezers removed them and let the soggy cigar end fall upon the envelope. Now the vial was in use. Those living hands uncorked it and poured 3 drops into the glass. The bluish globules seemed to writhe and melt into the yellow liquid until they had completely colored it a pale green. The goblet remained in view. The hands were motionless. The eyes outside the light were watching. For a short while, nothing occurred. Then, with mysterious slowness, the color of the liquid again began to change. The green darkened. It took on a brownish tinge. When the metamorphosis was complete, the clear liquid had become a dark, muddy solution.
I don't know why it's picking up everybody else.
Upon the paper, it inscribed a Chinese character. Beneath the hand wrote the word Li Shun. Then it inscribed words of explanation.
This poison, in liquid form, dries and adheres to any object upon which it is applied. Moistened, it quickly comes away and leaves no trace. Someone opened the cigar box in Philip Farmington's desk drawer. The box contained no loose cigars.
Thank goodness it's not picking up the other people in the other room.
From the center of the row and inserted the similar cigar, which had been treated with Li Shun. This cigar was slightly loose, so that it would be taken without effort by Farmington.
The hand rested. Then it added,
First proof. The remainder of the row was intact. Farmington would have disturbed it in taking a cigar from a tight row. Second proof. Cardona did not notice the strong aroma of the cigar which Farmington smoked. The person who placed it in the box had not obtained a cigar as strong as Farmington's own brand.
Another pause. Then,
no trace of the poison could remain on the cigar after Farmington had chewed the end, but the tip, cut off beforehand, lay on the floor where Farmington had thrown it. The analysis shows Li Shun on that tobacco.
Radio helping? Oh, okay. Radio's helping. I can't hear them on the stream end. Radio has you covered. Nice.
Facts in the Culkin's death.
It crossed out the words and added the single remark, This sheet was crumpled. The hands, working swiftly, removed the various articles from the table. The light clicked out. A low, soft laugh echoed eerily from the walls of the room. It was the laugh of the Shadow. The mastermind that worked in darkness had discovered how Philip Farmington had died.
Damn.
Chapter 8. Man Learns Facts. It was a different Rutledge man who appeared that night at the Cobalt Club. No longer did his face wear a harassed look. Instead of sitting solemnly in an obscure spot, Man strolled about through lounge and lobby with the spirit of contentment that had been his former wont. There was nothing in Man's bearing that attracted attention, however. Man was of a quiet, self-effacing type. Normally pleasant and courteous, he merely nodded to old acquaintances. Man had always believed that business would come to those who worked patiently and awaited it. His late misfortunes had somewhat riddled that theory, but his newly found opportunity had restored his self-confidence. Man was thinking as he lounged about the club. He was puzzling over business matters, and his thoughts were not of investments. Instead, he was dwelling on the activities of Double Z, the strange crime master who had baffled the police. All that day, after reading instructions in the envelope upon his desk, Rutledge Man had spent his time in reviewing copies of daily newspapers with their varied reports of recent murders. Who killed Joel Calkins? What mystery surrounded the death of Philip Farmington? Another question perplexed Rutledge Man.
Is that an
What
egg?
was the connection of Judge Harvey?
Is that an egg?
with the Calkins
An
murder?
egg?
For within the envelope left him by the Shadow, Man had found a complete report of the data supplied by Clyde Burke. In brief, Man was now fully acquainted with every detail of the Double Z business, and he was totally baffled.
Gosh damn.
These thoughts brought a frown to Man's forehead. Then he laughed softly to
thank you.
himself. After all, he was no detective. Why had he been chosen to study this case? He had spent the entire day considering the details in a methodical manner. Hence, he felt a clear conscience so far as his duty to the
Oh
mysterious
shit, there's
employer
8
was
chapters of this
concerned.
thing? Oh
But it
yeah.
added no constructive effort. As on the preceding evening, clusters of club members were discussing the death of Philip Farmington. The first wave of interest had passed.
There's
but
quite a
such
lot of
matter had not
chapters
soon
of the
been forgotten
Shadow.
at the Cobalt Club,
Shadow
where the dead
Double
banker
Z.
had been so active. Man unassumingly joined a group and listened to the conversation. He learned nothing that he did not already know. Man looked for Lamont Cranston among the men present.
Okay, I
He
can
did
tell you
not see
something.
him. Somehow, Man could not help but associate Cranston
Well,
with
we
the
got
good
two
fortune that had
we have
befallen
two
him.
protagonists.
For months, he had been brooding over his financial troubles. But had
We have
mentioned
two
them to no
protagonists
one
in this
until he
comic.
encountered
We've
Cranston
got
last night.
Elma and we've
It
got
was
Trent.
shortly after that the Man in Black had appeared.
It's
to
a
offer
dual
life
protagonist
instead of
comic.
Death. Man, careful and
And graphic
analytical
novel.
in reasoning, could see no definite connection between Cranston and the mysterious stranger, yet the association persisted in his mind. It was 11 o'clock. Man decided to return to his apartment. He went to the check room for his coat. He was leisurely tonight, for the old worn coat had been replaced by a new one. Man donned the garment and received his cane and hat with it. Like the coat, these articles were new.
So
He
it's
strolled across the
Elma
lobby,
and
said goodnight
Trent.
to the man stationed at the door, and stepped out to the sidewalk.
We've
It
got
was
Trent
drizzling again. Man looked
right
for a
here,
cab. He
which
heard
I
a
need to
horn
finish.
toot.
I've got to
The
fix this
taximan had spotted
smash.
him beneath the lighted marquee in the
Smash.
front of the club.
We've got
But
Trent,
before
we've
he could
got
get out of
Elma.
his vehicle, another cab shot from across the street and stopped suddenly in front of Rutledge.
Which one
Man.
is it?
A
The
business-like
protagonist?
driver opened
Elmo
the
and...
door, and Man stepped in.
No.
The cab rolled away while Man was giving his destination. The disappointed taxi driver
She is
swung
less...
alongside with his
She's
cab
not as
and
selfish
delivered a
as
barrage
Elmo.
of oaths at Man's driver, but that was the end of it.
Elmo's a
Man
piece of
smiled.
shit.
These fellows took their competition keenly.
That doesn't
"Now,"
share.
said Man aloud as he sank back in the cushions of the cab.
He doesn't
"Let's
share.
think some more about Double
He's
Z."
goddamn bastard.
Conclusions?
The words caused Man to start. They had come from beside him in a whispered voice that he recognized instantly. He turned in astonishment. Beside him sat the mysterious man who had visited him last night. At least, Man was positive of his companion's identity. even though he could see nothing but a black form in the corner of the cab. You are here, stammered man.
To receive your report,
Came the quiet reply.
I take it that you have followed my instructions.
I did, said man quietly. He had regained his composure after the first surprise. But I must confess that I am completely in the dark.
After reading all the reports,
Yes,
you formed no impression regarding Double Z.
none, except that he must be eccentric to the extreme, and possessed of cunningness that often goes with eccentricity.
That may all be true,
Came the whispered voice.
but let us be specific. What are your opinions regarding the Culkins murder?
I think the police have it about right, declared man. Double Z has gone in for crime, in person. He lured Calkins to that house after sending him a written threat. He killed him while he was telephoning. Cardona's theory that Double Z is not an expert murderer seems
I don't deserve it because of the dead jokes. She's a piece of shite. But so good at the at bed, yeah.
I think Cardona was wise to keep it quiet. There was a short silence while the cab rolled on. Man realized that the driver was not going directly to the apartment. They were entering Central Park now. He realized that the man at the wheel must also be
But don't worry.
of this stranger.
Don't worry, Kaz.
I have tested your impressions
Came the voice from the corner.
by giving you the simple facts as the police see them. Now, let me ask you this. Would Culkins, as a newspaper reporter, go to that house on East 80th Street before he told his city editor that he had received a death threat from Double Z?
No, replied man thoughtfully.
Then, what about the message?
I see, exclaimed man. It was planted on him.
Why?
Because he had mentioned Double Z over the telephone.
Now you're getting to the point.
The whispered voice expressed approval.
But why did Double Z allow Culkins to mention his name over the phone?
Possibly another eccentricity.
That is possible, but it is not in keeping with Double Z's policy. An interrupted statement. Why was Joel Culkins not permitted to complete it?
Because he was revealing Double Z's identity.
You believe Double Z told him that?
Said man. He was staring straight ahead at the back of the driver, almost oblivious to the man beside him. That doesn't sound logical, does it? I should think Double Z would have given Culkins wrong information, and then let him go through with it.
Why did Culkins mention Judge Harvey Tulland before he spoke of Double Z?
Came the questioning whisper. I don't know, admitted man.
Could he have considered Tulland of greater importance at that moment?
A gasp of sudden understanding came from man. His methodical mind was beginning to grasp the situation. He saw a new light, but even yet, he was still confused.
Let us presume,
came the voice,
that Double Z knew nothing of Joel Culkins.
Then why did Culkins go there?
To find out something regarding Judge Tulland.
Ah, exclaimed man. But why was Double Z there?
For the same reason as Culkins. Judge Tulland is the missing connection between the two.
Rutledge man was nodding, but his brain was in turmoil. He could not figure the connection, but he realized that new depths of the mystery were being probed. He heard a soft laugh from the darkness. It was a mirthless laugh that brought a shudder, even though man knew that his weird companion was his friend.
You have not seen the scene of the crime,
came the whispered comment.
But I have. I went there, assuming that Culkins had been killed on the spur of the moment, and not through premeditation on the part of his murderer. I found evidence to prove that point.
Double Z did not go there to kill?
Double Z did go there to kill,
contradicted the voice.
But his intended victim was not Joel Culkins. He was after Judge Harvey Tulland. Let us picture the situation. Judge Toland was living in that old house under the name of Joseph T. Dodd. The name card in the vestibule is warped and grimy. It shows traces of having been there for months. The thin carpet in the upstairs room is worn in spots. One place
But
is
yes,
before the
my
mirror.
two main
A man
characters
stood there,
is
often studying his
Trent,
own reflection, considering his disguise.
Trent Rosa, and Elma Bird.
Calkins went
Elma,
there
daughter
and
of
discovered
Bird.
Toland. It is obvious that the judge decided to tell the reporter his story, so Calkins called his city editor. First, he mentioned Toland, but quickly turned to the important information: the identity of Double Z. He could have learned it from only one source: from Judge Toland. Therefore, it is safe to suppose that Toland had given Calkins proof. For instance, a threat from Double Z.
The paper in the reporter's hand, exclaimed Man.
Exactly.
Confirmed the soft whisper.
Toland was expecting danger from Double Z. While Calkins was phoning, Toland was beside him. The positioning of the chair and the telephone at one side of the table indicates that. Picture the situation, then realize that at the crucial moment, Double Z entered the room.
I see it now, exclaimed Man.
4 shots,
went on the voice.
4 well-aimed shots that accomplished 2 purposes. First, the death of Calkins before he could complete the statement. Second, the death of Judge Toland, which Double Z had sought.
But there were 4 bullets in the body of Calkins.
Certainly. 2 were fired after the telephone was hung up by the murderer. 2 shots to make it look as if a burglar had done the work. There is one of Cardona's fallacies. 2 shots were perfectly placed. 2 were wide. A man may be a good shot or a bad one. He is never both. Double Z would not have attempted murder himself without being sure of his own ability.
But only 1 body was found in the room, objected Man.
The body of Judge Toland was removed. The evidence of his death and his removal were both obvious. A tiny blood stain on the carpet away from the spot where Calkins lay. Then more spots on the stairway.
Oh, damn.
Places where shoulders had rubbed against the wall. It took 2 men to remove the body.
Oh, damn. Shadow found out way better than a fucking detective.
Double Z entered by picking the locks. There were tiny marks to prove it. He left his companion in the vestibule. The man was smoking. There are cigarette butts in the corner and traces of ashes. Double Z went upstairs, opened the door of Toland's room, and committed the double murder. He went down and summoned his man. They carried out Toland's body as the stair and wall marks show. To confuse the police, Double Z fired 2 shots. Then he took his own message, which Toland had received, and left it with Calkins. I have seen that message. Both the paper and the ink show that it was written some time ago. As I said before, Calkins would not have kept it undercover. Cardona has simply added it to the other correspondence received from Double Z.
Shouldn't be gaming all the time.
Rutledge Man
With all
was
that art,
silent.
it's hard to see you gaming all the time.
Came the voice beside him.
We now know
Were its words.
that Double Z has been active for more than 1 year.
I see. Dabbing on me.
His activities are designed to create terror. They must have kept Toland.
I see how it is. I see how it is. Everybody's just dabbing on me.
He is a bold murderer, a good shot with an automatic, a man who has accomplices. He is also a man of strength, who with one
What
other
is it, baby
quickly
boy?
remove a body. He knows what is going on in the underworld, and he's a master of subtle murder, as the death of Philip Farmington shows. Yet so far, I have no exact clue to his identity. My plan is to search at every possible angle. You will play a passive part, directing the movements of my agents at my order. I have talked with you tonight to learn your reactions to my findings. Are they clear?
They are, declared Man.
In this envelope.
A packet was thrust in Man's hands.
You will find instructions regarding my agents and also facts pertaining to the death of Philip Farmington. Follow all the details and make complete reports. You will receive new orders from me, but do not expect
Czar is very good at gaming.
for a long while. Remember,
Play of the game over here.
The Shadow.
The revelation of the stranger's identity brought weird thoughts to man's mind. He had heard of the Shadow, the mysterious man of the night. He had half suspected his employer's identity, but the actual statement brought a sense of realism that he had not experienced before. The cab had come out of the park. It was whirling along a side street. The lights of an avenue were ahead. Man heard a shrill hiss from the dark figure beside him. Before he could look toward the Shadow, the cab swerved suddenly, and one wheel climbed the curb. Man clutched the strap that hung beside the window. The cab had stopped, and the driver was expostulating with a man at the wheel of a car alongside. A policeman arrived at that moment. "All right," Man heard the officer say to the driver of his cab. "Pull along. Oh, wait, you got a passenger? Better see if he's all right." The door was swung open. The inside of the cab showed clear beneath the glare of a street lamp. Man, in answer to the policeman's question, said he was unhurt, and then, before the door closed, gasped in astonishment. Dazed, eyes bulging from their sockets, he sat still as the cab rolled on toward his apartment. For the light that had entered the cab had shown no other occupant. Rutledge Man was alone. Somehow, in the space of a few short seconds, the mysterious figure beside him had left the cab. Invisibly, the Shadow had vanished into the night.
Oh, whoa. Oh, whoa.
Chapter 9. Gangsters Talk Business. Black Pete's place was a notorious hangout for denizens of the underworld. Ostensibly a nightclub, it was in reality the spot where sinister plots were hatched and blood money was paid. Enough coin to equal an emperor's ransom passed from hand to hand every month in the back room at Black Pete's. The place was tolerated by the police for various reasons. First, Black Pete paid tribute to the politicians. That in itself was ample excuse for the existence of his dive. But he played the game safe in addition. No wanted men were allowed within Black Pete's portals. Only those gangsters who were temporarily free from surveillance were permitted
I guess,
to enter. Strangers were allowed in the place.
Anybody work my shift? I can't be bothered.
Associates had keen eyes when it came to detecting
I would, but I doubt you live near me.
Gangdom in
yeah, I'm sorry, even.
Black Pete's laws. No killings were ever
I already worked from
his domain.
12:30 till
but they were never
10 o'clock.
The premises
I think I already worked too much.
It was located on the second floor of the building. There was apparently but one entrance to the second floor.
Then I got work at 1 tomorrow.
However, it was said that there were other means of entry known to Black Pete's chosen friends. The most interesting portion of the place was the labyrinth of passages that ran back from the cabaret floor. The main room had 2 side doors. These led to darkened corridors that divided and turned in all directions. Along these passages were rooms where gangsters met. Perhaps their purpose was to drink bootleg liquor in privacy. More likely, their intention was to scheme new killings. And
I'm on 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Damn, 12 hours.
No one could tell either his destination or his intention. The room to which he was bound was known only to himself and
you did dishes and made mirror books. Oh, okay.
Black Pete treated all customers alike, and whatever he knew of their business, he kept to himself. It was several days
I'm gonna get some.
Of Philip Farmington.
I'm gonna get a cup with ice. I'll be right back.
As well as
I'll be right back, guys.
For killing was the province of gangsters.
Let's go right here. I'll be right back. I gotta get some ice.
Was already tangled with previous murders. The death of Joel Calkins had also caused a stir. The reporter had known many gangsters. His death, by gunfire, savored more of the guerrilla killing than did the demise of Philip Farmington. Double Z was a constant subject of whispered speculation in the underworld, and his strange sobriquet had been mentioned often at Black Pete's. Night had fallen, and the cabaret was doing its usual business. Little attention was paid to those who sat at obscure tables in the background. Occasionally, a hard-faced individual arose and strolled through the portal to the nearest passage. Others, more indifferent, made directly for the side doors upon entering the place. Among the latter type was a short, stocky man who wore a dark sweater beneath his coat. His cap, tilted over his eyes, obscured his features. He cast a brief glance at the cabaret floor as he entered, then stalked through the doorway and was lost in darkness. He felt his way along the passage and stopped before a door. He stooped down an instant to knock at the bottom of the barrier. From the other side came the sound of a key turning in the lock. Then the door opened. The man entered. A moment later, the stocky man was seated at a small table, staring stolidly at a man facing him. The newcomer, Jake, had a cold, hard face with an ugly, pudgy nose, but the man who had awaited him possessed a still harsher appearance. Seated at the table, he appeared tall. Actually, he was of medium height. His thinness gave him the semblance of stature. His face, like his body, was thin. His cheeks were hollow and pasty. From either side of his hooked nose peered two beady eyes. His lips were parted to reveal pointed, fang-like teeth. His entire physiognomy betokened an inborn cruelty and ugliness. The man was hatless. His head was covered with a crop of short-clipped black hair. "Well, Jake," quizzed the fang-toothed mobster, "is it fixed?" "All set," growled the newcomer. "Here's the grand for the info that I'm supposed to get from you, Snakes." Grinned Snakes.
I'm back. Hold
That
up.
makes it even. Let's hear the story.
I'm back. I'm just
Said Jake.
I'm drinking
Dave
a cup
Martin's
of
made up his mind.
and a
He
cold
was on a
cup
Bodine bumped
so I can
off on
actually
Wednesday
drink
night.
it and enjoy
He's paid
drinking it.
$1 grand for wising him up on
The
the lay.
luxuries of the
There's
future.
$2 grand more if you can fix the bump off. "Tell him $3 grand, the cheapskate," responded
I
Snakes.
agree. I would never be a part of the past.
It'll cost $2 grand.
I can't just get cold ice out of my fridge
All right.
in the past.
Well, you're sure this'll go through okay? I'm getting leery, Snakes.
You know what I mean?
The pasty-faced gangster laughed contemptuously.
Roasted vegetables boiled in
Everything
water.
went right
Oh, cool.
before
Sounds
this,
good.
didn't it, Jake?
For about an hour
Yeah.
or so. Or
This bird
there's some onion
Z's
peel,
getting
banana
kinda
peels,
chesty.
carrots, and
Gives me
okay.
the bumps the way he
It's an
works.
oven.
That's his game, Jake.
Next time I
He was
want
right when he picked
to make a
you.
pot
The guy's always right. He don't take
of
no chances on a double
super
cross.
stew.
The first thing to
Take
keep a guy from
pre-roast
double-crossing is to
flour
make him
and
scared.
fat. Okay,
You ain't
okay.
scared of him. Yeah?
All right.
Snake showed his ugly teeth
Nice.
in a sour grin. "Look it. You think I'm on the inside? Well, I'll put you wise. Double Z ain't told nothing to Sneaks Rubin that Jake Dermott doesn't
yeah.
know. What do you think of that?" Jake stared at the
Board's
pasty-faced
recipes
gangster.
all
He
sound
knew that
delicious.
The man was telling the truth. Sneaks Rubin was an odd figure in the underworld. He was one of those strange characters that knew everyone and sided with no one. It was not until several months before that he had appeared in a definitive guise. Then his new condition was revealed to very few, Jake Dermott among them. Sneaks was a man who played it safe. "You know the lay," said Jake in an objecting tone. "I don't. So you know more than I do." "I don't know more than you, Jake," retorted Sneaks. "I figure more, that's all." "Tell me what you figure about Double Z, then." "All right," agreed Sneaks. "First of all, he's a smart guy. He's got 'em all talking, ain't he? He knows plenty that's going on. When some of these guys that call themselves big shots get ready to pull a job, they find out the dicks have been tipped off by Double Z. That makes them wonder about him. Then he comes along himself and knocks off a couple of gazebos. That makes him wonder more, don't it?" "He knocked off 3, said Jake. "That's right," agreed Sneaks. "You and I are the only guys that know it. What's more, you're the only one that ever worked with Double Z when you helped him lug that corpse out of the old house. You've seen him. What does he look like?" "Blamed if I know," exclaimed Jake. "I showed up that night like I was told, left that old stolen car around the corner. I walks in a vestibule like a shot. I hears a voice telling me to stay where I was. Then what? Sneaks leaned forward eagerly. The guy goes upstairs and I wait, but he's back again. Hear anything? He says in the dark. No, says I. He tells me to come along. We go in the dark all the way up on the 3rd floor. He grabs me by the arm and pushes me down toward the floor. Take hold, he tells me. Next thing I know is we've lugged a dead body down to the vestibule. Get the car, he says. I get it and come in. Between us, we walk that corpse across the sidewalk and prop it in the front seat.
Swifton Truppy, hello. Welcome, Raiders. Welcome. Hope you're doing well. Woo. Hope you're doing good. I'm just in the middle of working on my comic right now. I'm just working on page 6 right now. Hello, Shameless Suga. Alright, hello. We're just listening to an audiobook, royalty-free audiobook of The Shadow.
Declared Sneaks admiringly.
Double Z.
Other guy works like him, replied Jake in a low voice.
It looks amazing. Hello, Floof.
Sneaks was silent. Then he leaned across the table and whispered to his companion. Say, Jake, sometimes I wonder about this guy. Maybe he is the Shadow. The Shadow don't work with crooks, said Jake. You're right there, acknowledged Sneaks. But he may have changed. No one knows what that guy sets out to do. But I hope Double Z is the Shadow. Why? Jake was interested. Sneaks flipped a cigarette into his gash-like mouth and scratched a match on his thumbnail. He inhaled deeply before answering. Because I'd rather be with the Shadow than against him. You know, I met this Double Z once. That's when I began working for him. At Loy Rock's Hop Joint, in the dark. Pitch dark.
Hello, Flo.
I said I'd never seen
well,
him.
thank you so much for the raid. What were you guys playing? What were you guys doing?
Dean job, is he? He always does, returned Sneaks.
Let's see.
I only get away with
Swift.
Simple enough when I give you the dope.
No, I know. I'm looking at.
Laughed.
Hold up.
He shook his head in perplexity.
What were you doing?
He said. This guy must know what he's up to. Where does he get all
Let's
his
see.
ideas?
What were you up to? You were playing Pokemans. Holy shit! You were playing the Pokemans.
Paid to hear what's going on, but this guy does things one way.
Goodness.
Yeah?
And you're also you're a part of Neighborhood Watch. Thank you so much for coming in.
But he's laying low now.
Neighborhood Watch is what my sister is a part of, and that's so cool. That's so cool. If you guys don't know, the Neighborhood Watch, Barry streams is a part of it, and my sister is a part of that. So it's so nice. I love that people are giving her the time. You know, this is something she's wanted for a while. You know, being recognized. She's so sweet, and I'm so glad that they recognize her.
Suppose there was a big shot that they couldn't get at. They'd play ball, wouldn't they? They'd have to. Well, that's Double Z's game. He's going to be the real big shot. Not with Markin and Lombrosi. They're out for their own. But when Markin and Lombrosi are gone, it's going to be Jake Dermott and Tony Marano. And Double Z will be the next big shot. You're Markin's chief guy. Markin is next to Lombrosi in that mob. They picked you guys because you're tough, but don't know enough to get along without a boss over you. You're gonna have your chance. First Bodine goes the voyage, then Markin and Lombrosi. Who's gonna bump him? Quizzed Jake. You'll see, grinned Sneaks Rubin. When Bodine's laid out, there'll be somebody to square things with Markin. As for Lombrosi, well, he's slipping now.
But yes, no, you guys are all amazing. You guys are all stupendous. Thank you for being so amazing.
When he knocked off Farmington, who was too big a guy for Lombrosi to tackle. Don't forget,
if you guys need to go to bed,
he's in on this Italian business.
Don't stay up because of me.
So well out there. A glimmer of reason was dawning on Jake Dermott.
If you got things to do, go do it. Go do it.
You're sure about Wednesday night? Get that $3 grand, declared Sneaks. I'd rather handle this than let Markin try it. He'll get the credit for it. and a funeral to go with it. But if Double Z tips off the dicks with all this
I
mess
just-
still stewing, they'll be watching the hotel. Let them watch.
Did you
Bodine
wake up?
won't be
Just
there.
wake up?
Well, he be. In his hideout. The hotel's a blind. That's the dope you're to give Markin for his grant. I know where the hideout is. No bodyguards. Bodine ain't trusting him right now. Ooh, exclaimed Jake Dermott. That's the lay, Sneaks talked on. I've got the guts to do the job. I picked him for Double Z. He's a one-man mobbing himself, but I ain't trusting him alone on this trip. He'd go through with it, but it's too risky. He's been looking for a pal, and he's got one. Who? Leave that to me. Spill the news to Mark and back here tomorrow night with the $3,000. Got me? I gotcha. Sneaks reached up and turned out the light in the center of the little room. The door opened softly, and Jake Dermott stepped out. The sound of breathing was audible for
you
several
okay?
minutes after he had gone. Then the door closed, and a key turned in the lock. Jake Dermott was no longer in Black Pete's cabaret.
Yes, sir.
but Sneaks Rubens
If you guys
strode
need
through
to
a
go,
side doorway
go
and
to
glanced
rest,
around
go
the
to
floor
rest.
in search of a likely-looking
Don't
hall.
stop. Don't stop believing. Hold on to that feeling. Street lights. People. Oh, whoa.
Cardona prepares. Wednesday morning, Detective Joe
Right.
Cardona strolled into headquarters.
I don't know. Not feeling the best, but we don't talk about it. Okay. We won't talk about it.
In the office. Maybe another one of those Double Z gags. Left it lay for you or the inspector. Cardona was ripping open the envelope before the man had finished speaking. Out came a folded sheet. The detective scanned the lines that had been
Oh, thank you,
atrociously
Fluff.
typed. A gasp followed. What's the
Come
matter, Joe?
on, all you
Matter? What'll the
people.
inspector
Time
be here?
to
I
go
want him
and
to see
get
this. Looks real,
together.
too. Before
And
Cardona
better
could
have
explain
a
further,
little rock and
Fenneman
roll
walked in the door.
music to
He
get
stopped
you
short
through
when
the
he observed the
stormy
expression on the
weather.
face of
You
the star
do
detective.
whatever you
What's up?
feel.
He
And
inquired.
if you let go,
Double Z again.
nothing's
declared
gonna help
Cardona.
you for it.
What?
Rock and roll,
Let
so
me
come
see.
on, now put your
Wait,
hands
replied
together.
Cardona. I'll
So
read it.
come on, now
Holding the
put your
paper with
hands
both hands, he
together.
repeated the message
Now
aloud.
come on,
Today is the last
you
for
know it's
Arnold
now or
Bodine. He will
never.
be killed before
Take a
midnight
chance
unless
on
you
rock and
prevent.
roll.
Warn him.
Bam,
Signed by Double
bam,
Z.
bam, na 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 na
Handed the inspector the message.
na
Fenneman
na.
scanned the typed
Oh,
words.
I
He
feeling
became thoughtful as he turned to the
satisfied.
detective.
Come on,
Looks
let's
like he's
give your
gone back
mind
to
a
his owl
ride.
stunt, he said,
Ooh.
tipping us off, like he did before. I can't understand it, Joe. It's kind of puzzling, admitted Cardona, but it just shows how the man's mind turns. He's gotten wind of something, like he did before. Once in a while he's wrong, but this time he seems sure of himself. What's the best way to handle it? Put a bunch of plainclothes men on the job.
You have no
declared
money.
Cardona. Bodine hangs out in the Goliath Hotel, along with a bunch of friends, so-called friends, actually his bodyguards. Remember
You
that
didn't have to
Bernstein
do
murder?
that.
Well, this'll duplicate it if it goes through, but it won't. What about the newspapers? Cardona shook his head emphatically.
I'm just
Keep it away
singing
from him,
Boston right
he
now.
said. Wait until after tonight. This is either a big hoax or it's our chance to get on the trail of Double Z. But while Detective Cardona was planning to maintain silence with the press,
You don't
one
have to
reporter
speak if
was
you don't
aiming
want
get
to,
information on
Raven.
the
We
very subject
understand.
which the detective wished to avoid.
Oh!
Clyde Burke was answering a
Haven!
telephone call at the Classic office. A pleasant voice was
Oh
speaking
my
over the
gosh,
telephone.
Heaven.
Mr. Burke,
Yes?
this is the
My
National
gosh,
Trust.
Heaven.
Have you seen our man today?
No?
He's anxious to see you before 10 o'clock.
Thank you, Heaven.
Burke hung up the phone. I'm going over to the National
Thank
Photo,
you for
he
being
said.
such a
I'll
superstar.
look over some pictures. The man at the city desk nodded.
Oh,
Burke
shit.
left the office.
Fuck.
He went uptown instead of down.
Damn it, Heaven.
Where that telephone call had contained
God damn it,
certain
Heaven.
words which were emphasized by the speaker. The real import of the message was...
God damn it, Heaven.
Our
I
man,
forgot to ask you
10
what did
o'clock.
your son want
The message was obvious.
for a drawing.
But our man did not signify a representative of the photo service. It was the name Our Man. Therefore, Burke's destination was the office of Rutledge Mann in the Badger Building. Arriving at Suite 909 in the Midtown
You didn't
office
tell me.
building, Burke found the stenographer in the outer office. He was ushered into the inner sanctum,
satisfied.
where Rutledge Man sat
Give your
quietly at his
mind
desk.
a rest.
This was Burke's
It's up
first
to
meeting
you.
with the Shadow's new contact man.
You can do
Burke had
what you
received word
like.
in code to expect a call from him. Mr. Burke? Asked Man. Clyde nodded. Man handed him an envelope. Look over these securities, he said. Clyde found a coded message within.
And so
He read
many
it. The
biddies.
job is set for tonight. $1,000.
Oh my god.
Details not yet known.
Go don't
Meeting
damn
Club
heaven
Deluxe.
or I swear. No, I
The
just
writing
I forgot
vanished.
to ask her
Clyde turned to Man.
what her son
He knew
wanted,
he
and
could
I
now
was
talk
like,
freely
oh
with the
yeah,
quiet-faced
that's right.
investment broker who had the Shadow's confidence.
I keep
"This is a
forgetting,
copy?" he questioned, referring to the
and I
blank sheet
feel
of paper.
bad.
It was, declared Man calmly. He's uncovered something then. Yes. Before he proceeds, we must find out if the police have received any word. Burke nodded. They'd be keeping it quiet, was his comment, but I ought to be able to get it out of them. Do that, then report. Clyde left the office and went directly to headquarters. There he found Joe Cardona. The detective eyed him rather doubtfully. Cardona's manner was evidence to Clyde that the detective had received some message. Listen, Joe, said Clyde confidentially. Got
Bless
another
even
double
now.
C letter today, didn't you?
You guys are
I
too
can't
amazing.
recall
Thank you
it,
guys
said
so much.
Cardona coldly. That's strange, said Clyde. I thought maybe you did. Well, I was on a bum steer, that's all. What I've heard doesn't count. Wait a minute. Cardona stopped Clyde as he was starting toward the door. What do you mean? What have you heard? I've heard a lot, doing this wise owl stuff.
You
for the
gotta
classic.
tell me.
What have you heard that would interest me? Nothing, unless you received another note from Double
Even
Z.
you
Suppose
must
I
tell
have,
me.
questioned Cardona. You let me in on it, answered Clyde. I'll see
You
if it
must
checks
tell
out.
me
We don't want
what your
anything in the
son
classic,
wants
declared Cardona. So why should I talk
as
to
a
you?
birthday
We didn't
gift.
spill what Calkins said about Judge Tolan, did we?
Cause all I can give him
No,
is art.
admitted Cardona.
Because I'm.
Well, if you'll play
That's all
straight
I
with
got.
this, I'll give it to you. You deserve a scope anyhow. This'll be one for tomorrow. Shoot, said Clyde. Well, Cardona said. Double Z's tipped us off that someone's gonna bump off.
I did.
Arnold
Look back
Bodine
at the
tonight.
chat before boards
Now, what do you
biddies.
know? Does that fit in? It does, said Clyde. How? Well, Clyde said thoughtfully, you know I've been handling this wise owl column since Calkins died. I get around a bit, and when some of these inside boys find out who I am, I spill a lot of chatter. Most of which is hokum, but I'm always listening.
Oh, okay.
Every now and
Wither
then,
Bonnie.
I overhear something
Wither
that's
Bonnie.
worth following. And you heard
Wither Bonnie.
some mention of a big
Let's
job going
see.
off tonight.
Wither
$1,000
Bonnie.
being paid. To whom? Clyde shrugged his shoulders. You don't know who's in back of it, quizzed Cardona.
Oh, okay.
Declared Clyde. That's all I can tell you. $1 grand for
Spooky.
one job. Where and how? I don't know.
So
Well,
spooky.
said Cardona. That's enough. Here's Double Z's note, and you've promised to keep it out of the news until I give the word. Clyde read the message. He was apparently
So
studying the signature.
spooky.
Actually, he was committing the words
Spooky.
to memory. It looks genuine, said Cardona. Before midnight, remarked Clyde. That means you get the story as soon as it breaks. If it's a hoax, you can let it ride at 1 minute after 12. I think it's gonna miss. Why? Because my men'll be there. Are you warning Bodine? Yes and no. We'll let him know
Wither
something's
Bonnie
up,
it is.
but he won't know just what. Clyde went back to the Badger building after he left headquarters. He sent a long envelope into
That's what he
Rutledge Mann
wants.
by the
That's what the kid
stenographer.
wants.
The girl returned to tell Clyde that Mr. Mann would call him later. Back at the Classic office, Clyde busied himself with the Wise Owl column. He had gathered numerous rumors of doubtful authenticity, and now prepared them in the form of a story which promised much and told little. It was 5 o'clock when he received a telephone call. This is Jack, said a non-committal voice. It doesn't seem as though you're ever in the office. I called before 9 this morning. What are you doing tonight? Did you get my message?
I left word for you to call immediately.
Must have been a slip-up, replied Clyde. Sorry I'm busy tonight. Give me a buzz tomorrow. He pondered on the message. Seem. That meant CM. Thus, the complete message of emphasized words was CM before 9 tonight. Get message. Call immediately. Clyde understood. The Club Deluxe, an uptown cabaret where gangsters sometimes gathered. An ideal meeting spot, provided little was to be discussed. In that place, there would be no risk and a possible opportunity to communicate with
He's a
them,
big
whose
FNAF fan
identity
and likes
Clyde knew
spookies
well.
like his mom.
Shortly before 7
Fair.
o'clock, Detective Joe Cardona appeared in the lobby of the Goliath Hotel. A man stepped forward to speak
Fair.
to him.
Fair
Nothing
point.
doing yet, he said.
Alright.
Bodine come in?
Oh,
No, he's
I
expected.
know what I'm drawing him.
I'm going up to see.
When's his birthday?
Cardona
So I
arrived
know
at the
my
door
time
of
limit.
Arnold Bodine's apartment on the 18th floor. It was opened in answer to his rap. Joe shouldered his way in past the man who stood there. He encountered an individual whose face bore a long, twisting scar. Hello, Creighton, said Cardona. Bodine come in yet? No, was the response. The man was one of Bodine's bodyguards, but he's liable to drop in any minute. What's the idea of you coming up? You've had a couple of gawky-looking dicks on the floor all
Okay.
afternoon.
So plenty of
I'll talk to
time.
Bodine when he comes in, declared Cardona. Make yourself at home. The words were spoken with assurance. Creighton knew well that Cardona was not after Bodine. The big shot had
It's
been
up to
inactive for
you.
months, living on
You
tribute
can
and
do what you
reputation.
like.
You don't know where Bodine is? Questioned Cardona. Creighton appeared puzzled at first, then decided to be frank with Cardona. Listen, he said. If you're worrying about him, forget it. He's out. And when he's out, nobody knows where he is. I don't need to tell you that he's okay the minute he walks into the lobby of this hotel. Sometimes he stays out all night, but tonight he's coming back sure. When? Before midnight. By 11 at the latest. All right. I'll come back when he gets in. Joe Cardona strolled to the door. He noticed one of his men in the hallway and stopped long enough to have a hurried word with him. The plainclothes man told him that others were posted on the floor. The star detective went down into the lobby. At 8:15, he came back. Arnold Bodine had not been heard from, Creighton informed him. This time, Cardona decided to wait. He seated himself in a comfortable chair and refused a highball that was offered him. It was at that particular moment that Clyde Burke rolled past the Goliath Hotel in a taxicab, bound for the Club Deluxe. He glanced at the lighted building as he went by, and saw a man slouched by the entrance. One of Cardona's detectives, Clyde decided, but there was something he did not see. Something that also escaped the vigilant gaze of the man posted there. It was a shadowy form that lurked beside the lighted entrance, scarcely 10 feet from where the detective stood. The shadow, like Cardona, was awaiting the return of Arnold Bodine. Chapter 11. The Tip-Off. Two men sat at a table in a corner of the spacious Club Deluxe. The popular nightclub was rarely crowded at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday evening, hence the spot which the men had chosen was well away from observation. No one was within 30 feet of them. Both men were well dressed. They bore a similarity of appearance. There was one noticeable difference: their expressions. One had a firm face, a steady gaze, and well-chiseled features that gave him a distinctive profile. The other possessed a brutal countenance, sullen and merciless. Facially, there was no resemblance between Cliff Marsland and Clipper Tobin. Cliff replaced his coffee cup on the table. He glanced about him to make sure that no one was near. Out with it, Clipper, he said in a low voice. It's time I knew the layout for tonight. You getting your grand, ain't you? Came the sullen reply. Sure, said Cliff. That's why I want the lowdown. If you expect the help you want, you gotta shoot straight with me, that's all. I'm shooting straight.
What's
Cliff,
up? What's up, Cliff?
We ain't likely to run into no trouble tonight. I'm gonna do the job. You'll be there in case we run into a second guy. We've gotta get one gazebo. It'll take two of us to do that. All right, said Cliff quietly. Suppose you go it alone then. I'll give you back your money. Clipper's eyes sparkled angrily. His vicious glance was met by Cliff Marsland's firm stare. The tough gangster had met his equal. He realized that he could no longer play pretenses with Cliff Marsland. Listen, Cliff, he said in an appeasing tone. I've told you before that I ain't the boss. I'm getting paid like you. The fellow that slipped me the dough figured that only one guy needed to know the lay. I'd done jobs for him before. This is your first crack. You can't blame him for being careful. He told me to get a man to work with you.
He was bubbly and busy.
That much was left up to you. I can't see why you're holding out. I ain't doubting you, Cliff, appealed Clipper. I picked you as soon as I heard you was on the loose. I heard about you from guys that knew you up in the big house when you was doing a stretch a few years back. You did some good bumping off after that too, they told me. Cliff smiled to himself. He knew that his reputation in gangdom was intact. What Clipper Tobin had said was true. Cliff had served a term in Sing Sing for a crime which he did not commit. After that, he had fought among racketeers, but he had been on the side of Gangland's most feared avenger, the Shadow. This was unknown to Clipper. Cliff remained silent while his mind flashed back through the past. Out of the corner of his eye, he was noting the man at the other table. Clipper observed his companion's silence, but misconstrued it. He decided that Cliff was becoming lukewarm. Listen, Cliff, he said. The guy that hired us doesn't know you. You're right when you said he left it up to me. I didn't tell him your name any more than I told you his. I just said that I'd found a killer to leave the rest to me. He took my word for it, but he said for me to use my noodle and to do the job without much chatter. At the same time, you're gonna wise up pretty quick to what we're doing. We ain't going to lose no time after we get out of this joint, so I'll play the game and tip you off right now. That is, if you're satisfied with what you're getting. I am. Is that enough for you? Cliff laughed. Say, Clipper, was his response. I'd have gone along with you for half of what I'm getting. I got dough. $1 grand isn't a lot of cash, but what's a killing? I've seen plenty of times when I'd handle one for the fun of it. A sordid grin came over Clipper Tobin's ugly face. This was the sort of talk he liked to hear. I told you, we're safe on this, he declared. I took your word for it, Clipper. You're going through with the job, okay?
Going through with the job, okay?
Clipper saw no double meaning.
Send you some references on Discord. Hopefully they're helpful. Anything you need from me, bro? Just your wonderful presence and a surprising high five. Just the usual, like always. Just your beautiful, radiant, your beautiful, radiant, personality. That's right. That's what I like.
Look of a man who was
yes.
Is that all? Asked Cliff.
Withered Bonnie from 2, I think. Yeah, from FNAF 2.
Certainly not.
It's so spooky.
Modine's a has-been. He's still getting his. Well, he'll get it in a different way tonight. Again, Clipper Tobin was pleased by his companion's attitude. Still, he could not help but think that Cliff was minimizing the danger.
Hell yeah, high five.
Out, don't you?
That's
Clipper.
what friends do.
Sure.
They give each other a high five.
At the Goliath Hotel. You know how many bodyguards he's got, don't you? I've heard he has 5.
Right?
You heard right.
That's what friends do.
Don't it? No. Why not? Because I figured right away that you've got some way of sliding around them. Otherwise, it would take more than 2 of us to do the job. You got a head on you, Cliff, said Clipper admiringly. Well, you got the right lay. Although, I'll surprise you when I give you the inside. What do you think is Bo?
Hey, balls.
Too many bodies.
You got balls, kid.
Why? He isn't paying them enough.
I never understood that.
He'd be better off with 2. Giving them as much as he's handing 5.
Maybe I'm just an idiot, but
Clipper nodded. Well, here's the lowdown. 1 of the 5 is squealed. He's let out something that nobody knew, which is the Bodine's layout up at the Goliath Hotel is a blind. He's got his real hideout somewhere else. Those 5 bodyguards are all baloney. You don't need any. Those guys get paid for doing nothing but keeping mum. They're not supposed to know where his hideout is, but one of them found out and spilled the dope. How? Cliff was taking advantage of Clipper's sudden volubility. Now that the man had begun to talk, he was going through with it. He was offered some dough to tell me what he knew about Bodine. Where's Bodine's bodyguard? Clipper threw a hasty glance to make sure that no one had approached.
Have a good rest.
His eyes sought the clock above a distant counter. In the Maurice apartments, he said. 8 blocks from the Goliath. We're going there now. He calls himself Andrew
Have a good
Davis.
rest, Flop, and
Cliff
have a
slipped his
good
right
shift,
hand into his coat pocket.
even.
He was leaning against the wall.
I'll miss him.
His arm appeared motionless.
Only tears in
but
my
his
eye.
hand was
Only
busy.
tears.
He was scrawling quick items of information on a small pad in his pocket, using the stub of a pencil. Ready? Questioned Clipper. The gangster's eyes were directly on Cliff, but he did not detect the secret action. Cliff nodded and arose. His fingers were twisting the sheet of paper into a small ball. His hand came from his pocket, and the pellet dropped into his hat as he reached to get it. The 2 men walked across the cafe. As they passed the table where the lone man was seated, Clipper scrutinized him suspiciously. The man was busy eating, and apparently did not notice Clipper's action. It was Clyde Burke of the Classic, but Clipper did not recognize the reporter. Cliff Marsland, following close behind Clipper, did not even glance in Clyde's direction. As he passed the table, his hat brushed against it, and the pellet of paper rolled on the tablecloth. Clyde set his napkin on the table at that particular instant and trapped the little wad with its precious information. No observant eye could have detected what had happened. Clyde Burke acted as though he were being watched. He had captured the ball of paper unseen. Now he drew it into his lap with the napkin. With one hand beneath the table, he unrolled the wad. The message lay upon his lap. The penciled scrawl was plainly visible by a light that came from a pillar behind the reporter. Out to get Bodine. Hideout Maurice Apartments. Fake name, Andrew Davis. Clyde made no motion. He sat at the table for a full minute without even glancing toward the door where the 2 men had gone. He was allowing sufficient time for them to leave Club Deluxe. His first action was to call for the waiter and pay the check. Leisurely, he strolled to the entrance. There was a telephone booth there, but he ignored it. Better to make his call outside. The Club Deluxe was located on the 2nd floor. As Clyde was striding down the stairs, he encountered...
This one's pretty good.
What's the name of that fucking, like, shampoo that, like, no more tears?
L'Oreal Kids.
L'Oreal.
L'Oreal.
It's the opposite. It's like, it's just nothing but full of tears.
Only
out
tears?
When I was little, it said no more tears, and I was like, okay, and I rubbed a bunch of my eyes, and then I cried, and I got mad.
You lied, Johnson! Also, other Johnson!
I'm not even kidding. It's like, why would they? Why? That's every commercial they had. It was like tear free. I was like, what does that mean? It's like, well, if you get it in your eyes, you won't. It doesn't feel bad. I'm like, oh, okay, and I literally just poured it in my eyes and just
You
rubbed
get
it in.
a little bit in your eyes, you
I was like, this
fucking
is
maniac
This is bullshit.
child.
Cause we're worth it too!
Why would I not do that? You know, why would you tell that to a kid?
Okay,
I think they were telling the parents. I think that wasn't for
Why would you advertise that on a children's TV channel? No more tears,
all it
man.
was less sensitive shampoo.
They said no more tears.
Adam,
We believe you. We know the product. No one's arguing that it said no more tears.
I should have actually sued.
you wouldn't have a fucking case this bad.
What are you talking about? People win cases, stupid cases like that all the time.
That actually
That is false advertising.
No, it isn't, Adam.
Yes, it is. Are you a lawyer? Because I am.
No, you're not. You're a liar.
I just, now that I heard that, I was like, oh yeah, no more tears, all the tears, only tears.
Downward, accidentally stumbled against one and threw the man toward the wall. An angry response was the result. Sorry? Yeah? Came the vicious retort. Clyde found himself staring into the eyes of a tough-looking individual, evidently a gangster habitué of the Club Deluxe. The man had been drinking, but he was by no means incapable. He had apparently reached that early stage of drunkenness that produces pugnacity. The man reached forward and clutched Clyde by the shoulder. "You know who I am." Clyde was intent on his errand. He sought to mollify the man, but as he began to speak, the fellow became more violent. Despite a warning cry from one of his companions, he swung a quick blow at the reporter's chin. Clyde warded it aside. He thought quickly. A fight now would be unwise. The other men might side with their friend. At the same time, it was necessary to get away. As he parried the blow, he made no effort to punch back. Instead, he stepped back a pace, avoided a second swing, and started down the steps. It was then that his opponent, angered at Clyde's
Hey, Paul,
agility,
they
threw
lied
himself
to us.
forward.
Screw the force.
Clyde
Who's
could not avoid
got a
that
grenade?
plunge. He raised his hands
Oh
in
man,
protection
Senator
and lost his footing as he
Pineapple,
stepped backward.
you have the floor.
The weight of the man's body landed upon
Half-Life
him, and
Pineapple.
Clyde Burke was thrown headforemost down the steps. He felt a strange dizziness as he was hurled
Senator
downward,
Pineapple
and his head struck against something.
stops
and all
all
was black.
stops
He
all
opened his eyes to see a
that
group of
oppose
faces
it.
peering
Yeah,
at him.
all
He
right.
recognized
Alien
the features of the rowdy
and
who had attacked him.
government
This
officials.
fellow, despite his tough appearance, seemed the most apprehensive member of the crowd. "All right, buddy?" he asked. Clyde nodded. Two other men propped him against the side of the wall. He noted that the cafe manager was present. That partly explained the change in his attacker's attitude. Another reason was immediately put forward. "You're from the Classic, ain't you?" Clyde nodded again. "Didn't mean to hurt you. It was my fault starting things," came the apology. "You must, tripped when I grabbed you. Wasn't that what happened, boys?" The fellow's companions chimed their agreement. The manager of the Club Deluxe spoke to Clyde. "All right now?" he asked. "All right," said Clyde, rubbing a bump on the side of his head. "Say, how long have I been out?" "Pretty near 10 minutes." Clyde suppressed a gasp of alarm. Cliff Marsland and Clipper Tobin were on their way to Bodine's place. It was not at the Goliath Hotel, where he knew the Shadow would be on watch. 10 precious minutes had been lost. He must let the Shadow know. Rising clumsily to his feet, he shook hands with a man who had battled with him and grinned as though the matter was of no account. Everyone seemed relieved. "I'm supposed to be down at the Classic office," he explained groggily. "I'm not hurt. Let's forget it." "Have a drink?" questioned his late opponent. Clyde shook his head. "Want a cab?" inquired the solicitous manager. "No," was the reporter's response. "I'll take the subway." He steadied himself against the rail and fought off a spell of dizziness. He was anxious to avoid further delay. He waved his hand in a friendly manner and went down the steps, trying to appear at his best. His head was swimming when he reached the sidewalk. The bright lights of the avenue confused him. He walked toward the corner.
Senator
spied a
Pineapple
drugstore, and
is
entered.
the ultimate
As luck would have
negotiator.
it, all the
Yes,
phone
Senator
booths were
Pineapple
occupied.
seems to
Clyde
stop
decided to go
all
elsewhere, but his legs seemed
problems.
too weak. He sat on a stool at the soda fountain and rested, his head throbbing, all about him confusion. Someone
Right
left the
next
booth.
to
Clyde
laser-guided
sprawled into the apartment.
rocket
He
launcher.
dropped his nickel and tried
Seems
dial.
to...
There were black spots before
I
his
mean,
eyes.
he
His
opens
fingers
a lot of
slipped.
doors.
Began again. With great effort, he managed to dial
Conquistador
the number. He waited
laser-guided
patiently,
rocket
the ring over
launcher
the wire conflicting
seems
with
to
the
open a
throbbing
lot
in
of
his
doors
head.
in that
At
game.
last,
Just
he heard a
saying.
quiet voice, seemingly far away.
Oh man, I would love to play that.
He said in response.
How much is Black Mesa anyway?
Word.
That's a good question.
Clyde's lips
Let me
were
look
to the
that up.
mouthpiece of the phone.
It's gonna bother
There was
me.
no opportunity for
It's gonna bother
artfully
me.
worded phrases. His grogginess was coming on again
Now
in his
open.
stuffy booth. "Bodine," he said in a low voice.
Because
"I'm not
I
at
actually
Goliath,
would
at
love to play
Melissa
the
Parker's. Phony name, Andrew Davis, on their way to get him. Hurry." A word of understanding came over the wire. Clyde hung up the phone and sat with his head in his hands. There was a rapping on the door of the booth.
Ooh.
Someone else wanted to make a call. Clyde came out, made his way to the street, and leaned against a wall while the fresh air began to revive his sickened senses. It must have been fully 20 minutes after the men left the Club Deluxe before he sent his message through. But now all was well. He had reported to Burbank, the Shadow's confidential aide.
I
The
wonder
message in turn would be relayed
That-
to the Shadow. Before Arnold Bodine's enemies had arrived,
That's my
the
question.
Shadow would be there,
If
unless Clyde's call had been too late.
if they're going to do Blue Shift and the other one. So there's Blue Shift and then there's
Chapter 12.
there's
The
Blue
Hideout.
Shift and then there's
When Clipper Tobin and Cliff Marsland left the Club
it's the
Deluxe,
other one.
The toughened gangster who headed the two-man expedition led his companion to a taxi. They rode rapidly
The other
down the
DLC
avenue and
that
alighted
came
at the
out
corner
for
of a
it.
side street. Here, Clipper conducted Cliff.
I mean,
along the
I would
street,
understand
away
if
from the
they
previous
didn't.
lights. Hardly had they moved
I am
into
just
its doorway
glad that
before another man
that Steam
followed
was
the
like,
same
oh
path.
shit,
He
you
stepped
made a
from a
free
doorway near the
update
corner and
to
moved
our
swiftly in
free
pursuit.
remake of our
Only for a
game,
brief moment
and
did his
it
face
fixes a
show
lot of the
beneath corner
problems
light.
of the original
It was
game.
Sneaks Rubin,
Oh
the
shit,
secret director of the crime that was about to transpire.
makes people
Neither
want to
Clipper
play
nor
it
Cliff knew
again.
anything
Oh
of his
man,
presence.
you know what? Why don't you put it on our page? We'll take some of that profit, but you'll get most of that, and we'll offer you a fucking job.
Cliff, always wary,
It's like,
glanced
fuck
behind him
yeah,
as he
you
moved
will.
along. Clipper did
Fuck
not
yes,
consider
you
the
will.
action strange. It was to be expected. But Cliff saw nothing, for Sneaks Rubin knew where the other men were going, and kept well out of sight. "We're going to cut in the back way," said Clipper in a low voice. "There's a fire tower that's easy to get into. Nobody sees us coming, nobody sees it leaving. This'll be a soft getaway." The course taken by Clipper led across another avenue, then through an alley in back of a garage. Clipper had discharged the cab sufficiently far from the apartment house where Arnold Bodine lived to ward off possible suspicion of the driver. Now, ahead of the two men, showed the lighted windows of the building for which they were bound. "Now you can't see Bodine's apartment from here," whispered Clipper in the darkness. "The garage runs right up against the apartment house. Bodine's apartment is one story above the top of the garage on the 4th floor." Cliff understood this as they turned a corner of the alley.
I mean,
The old
I would
garage
love to
building
play
fronted
both
on the next
back to
avenue,
back to
serving
show
the
people
apartment house.
like
The garage had an
the
L-shaped
difference of
front,
Half-Life
the
1
projection
and the
being an
difference of
extension which
Half-Life
abutted against the lower stories of the apartment building.
Black
The alley
Mesa,
ran down to this,
because
ending in a
I think
cul-de-sac.
that they
Clipper stopped
went
at the
above
gate
and
of the
beyond
short,
to
blind
make
alley
an
that reached
amazing
the
game.
entrance to the fire tower. Clipper pointed almost straight upward toward the front of the apartment. He designated lighted windows on the 4th floor. "See?" came his whisper. "That's the place. Take it easy until we get into the fire tower. There ain't nobody around here, but we gotta play it safe. This is our way out. Don't forget that." Cliff gazed into the black space that ended with the garage wall and realized that there could be no escape by that direction. The path which they had followed was their one means of leaving. He smiled grimly to himself. Clipper Tobin expected an easy escape. He did not know what he was about to encounter, for Cliff was positive that by this time the Shadow had arrived. It was nearly 20 minutes since they had left the Club Deluxe. Burke had received the all-important information. He had surely relayed it to the Shadow promptly. The Hotel Goliath was only 8 blocks away. Perhaps the Shadow had entered the apartment house by this very method, the fire tower. Perhaps he had come by the front way. At any rate, Cliff was confident that the mysterious man in black would be on hand with one of his amazing surprises. A few minutes' stall would not hurt. Cliff nudged Clipper and whispered in his ear. "Lay low a minute, Clipper," was his warning. "Maybe somebody's followed us." He knew that even if the Shadow were lurking in the darkness, vigilant observation would be of no avail. The Shadow had a strange ability for remaining unseen, even when persons were looking at the very spot where he might chance to be. Clipper Tobin heeded the warning. Crouched by the black side of the apartment house, he listened, while his shrewd eyes sought to pierce the shroud of night that hung throughout the narrow alley. "Nobody around," he whispered. "Come on." They moved cautiously to the fire tower. Up the steps they went, silently and slowly. They reached the 4th floor. Clipper opened a steel door gently and peered into a lighted corridor. He waved Cliff along. The corridor turned. Clipper pointed along the branch that led to the front of the building. There was only one door visible at the end of the passage. Cliff knew that it must be Bodine's apartment. The number was plain as they approached. 458. A key appeared in Clipper's hand. Cliff decided that it must have been provided by the informant who had discovered Bodine's hideout, the traitor who had revealed the name under which the celebrated Big Shot lived in this abode. With expert touch, Clipper inserted the key in the lock. He opened the door softly. The men stood in a little hallway with a door on each side. Clipper closed the door through which they had come. He hesitated a moment, undecided which door to open next. He shrugged his shoulders. Evidently, either one would do. Bodine could be in only one room. If they saw no one in the first, they could try the second. "Ready?" whispered Clipper. "I'm going in. You stick here to cover." It was quite dark in the little hallway, the only light coming from a transom that let dull rays flicker in from the corridor outside. Still, the light was sufficient to show the automatic which Clipper had unlimbered. Cliff had his own pistol in his hand. His brain was working fast, but his nerves were steady. Nevertheless, Cliff Marsland was tense as Clipper placed his left hand upon the knob of the door at the right. What would that open door reveal? Cliff knew that he was on the verge of an exciting adventure. Until now, he felt that he was playing a passive part, but somehow he had a hunch that he now had work to do. His instructions were based upon a very simple formula. Unknown to Clipper Tobin, Cliff was working with the Shadow. It was the Shadow's purpose to frustrate the crime that brewed tonight, not because the Shadow had anything in common with Arnold Bodine, but because the killing foretold by Double Z must be frustrated. Cliff was simply the Shadow's informant. The course of events had decreed that he must accompany Clipper Tobin on this expedition, but with the Shadow now here, there was no need for Cliff to act. Whatever the Shadow might do, Cliff's status would remain the same. He, like Cliff, would appear as an intercepted killer. Still, it was Cliff's duty to aid the Shadow in any way within his power. He could do this if necessary, even though it might reveal his true capacity. One point pleased Cliff. His identity was unknown to any man except Clipper Tobin. He knew that Clipper worked for some other man, but Clipper had agreed to deal with Cliff alone and to keep his name a secret. When Clipper agreed on something, he kept his word. That was why he had so long remained a free agent in Gangdom, unmolested by warring gunmen. Cliff ceased all contemplation suddenly as the door which Clipper controlled began to open inward under the gangster's pressure. Light entered the little hallway. Cliff's body moved forward with his gun hand raised. The gangster stepped swiftly into the room and Cliff slid to his place at the open door. The entire scene was revealed to Cliff. A man was sitting in a chair at the far corner of the room.
It's a sleepy rabbit.
Cliff recognized
Guys,
him.
there's a sleepy rabbit right next to me.
His appearance was a trifle different from the usual pictures of
If only
Big
there
Shot.
was something I could
Bodine's
do
hands
for
were
this
sprawled
sleepy
upon the chair
rabbit.
arms. A startled, hunted expression was upon his face. He was staring at the muzzle of Clipper's automatic. The gangster was threatening him from the center of the room. Cliff, from an angle, saw Clipper's ugly, menacing profile. Peering quickly around the edge of the door, Cliff was surprised to note that the room was otherwise empty. Where was the Shadow? Could it be possible that he had not arrived? For an instant, Cliff thought that Bodine might be the Shadow in disguise, but one more view of the startled man in the corner altered that opinion. Bodine, answering a grunted command from Clipper, was elevating his hands above his head. The man was helpless. "Big Shot Bodine," sneered Clipper sarcastically. "All ready to be bumped off. Don't like it neither, eh?" The threatened man licked his lips painfully. He made a reply in a forced voice, a feeble effort to mislead his enemy. "My name is Davis," he said slowly. "Andrew Davis. I can't understand why you've come here." "Andrew Davis, huh?" came Clipper's contemptuous retort. "You got Bodine's mug. That's enough to spell curtains for you, wise guy." Bodine quivered, and his eyes rolled from side to side like some hunted beast at bay. He saw Cliff's dim form in the doorway, but knew that he was viewing another enemy. His expression became more fearful. Funny, thought Cliff, how the biggest men among gangsters hated to die. Those who ordered death for scores of enemies, underworld czars like Bodine, were the ones who loved life the most. The helpless man stared at Clipper Tobin and sought to parley as a last resort. "How much dough do you want?" he questioned hoarsely. "Name it. I've got it." You have? Ridiculed Clipper. Well, you keep it, but it won't be yours long. Lay off of that money, Squawk. I've heard it before, and it don't go. I got my dough for this job, and I go through with it. Savvy? Bodine did not reply. Cliff could see the satisfied look upon Clipper's face. The killer instinct was coming to the fore. Clipper had deliberately waited in order to taunt his helpless victim. Now, his gloating finished, he was ready to fire the fatal bullets. Ready, Cliff, came his voice. It's set for the getaway. I'm gonna plug him. Wait, came Cliff's quiet response. Don't shoot yet. It won't be good for you, Clipper. The gunman did not turn. His finger was still on the trigger, but he noted something in Cliff's tone that made him hold back. Still facing Bodine, he listened for Cliff's next words. They were not long delayed. Cliff Marsland had seen that action was imperative. Something had delayed the shadow. Perhaps he had never received the message. The duty that was now Cliff's stood obvious. The shadow had planned to prevent this killing. It was Cliff's job to do that work in the absence of the shadow. I've got you covered, Clipper, said Cliff in the same steady voice. One move, and out you go. Clipper did not move. Put up your gat. Clipper obeyed, sullenly. You, Bodine, added Cliff, speaking to the man in the corner. Keep away from any foolishness. I got a bead on you, too. Encouraged by this remark, Clipper Tobin swung in the direction of his former pal. He stepped back as he saw the leveled automatic. Up with the mitts, ordered Cliff. Clipper obeyed. Cliff was master of the situation. Hunter and hunted, both were now at his mercy. The scowling face of Clipper Tobin was equaled in expression by the puzzled countenance of Arnold Bodine. What are you trying to do? Demanded Clipper sullenly. Sell out to this guy? That's none of your business, responded Cliff. I have got my own game. He was in a quandary. This was not an enviable spot. Cliff had saved Bodine, but neither did he desire to kill Clipper Tobin. Yet now that he had betrayed his hand, there would be certain danger if Clipper remained alive. It was impractical to await the coming of the shadow. This tableau of two men with hands poised in front of a revolver might lead to unexpected consequences. Cliff decided upon immediate action. Even though he was now an enemy of Clipper's, he could keep the gangster from discovering his true associations. Clipper's last remark gave him a cue. I've got my own game, declared Cliff. Bodine's not going to get bumped off by you. I'm going to let you slide out. That's more than you deserve. Double-crossing me, eh? Derided Clipper, defiant even in the face of death. I get you now. Bodine fixed it with you before this. You tipped him off. You wanted to see the guy that was out to get him. You're both yella. You got me here, but you're scared to bump me. Let him have it, bud, interposed Bodine, seeking to work with his rescuer. I'll slip you $5,000 for the job. He won't squawk when he's dead, and you won't run any chances. They'll think I got him. That's not my game, returned Cliff. I don't want your money, Bodine. Baloney, sneered the defiant Clipper. You're leaving here, Clipper, said Cliff. Leaving without your rod. Come over here and don't lower your hands. Clipper obeyed. Cliff stopped him before he was too close. With a quick, decisive action, he caught the butt of Clipper's revolver and dropped the weapon on the floor. He stepped back and waved the man toward the center of the room. Clipper retired sullenly. Bodine had made no motion. It was easy to see that Cliff's businesslike methods had impressed him. Cliff made no motion to pick up the revolver that lay on the floor.
4 years ago.
Could come later. Instead, he motioned to Bodine and pointed toward the telephone with his left hand. You're gonna call your mob, Bodine, he said.
Hey, Bob, how are the negotiations? How are the negotiations? And now for something completely different. Okay. Alright, you heard, Abel. Oh, yeah. Coming along. Now for something completely different. Alright.
Tell them to hop over from the Goliath Hotel. As soon as I know they're on their way, you're going to travel, Clipper, and I'll follow. So keep going. Plenty fast. Bodine, seeing salvation, kept his hands well away from his body as he reached for the telephone. He gave a number, and when the hotel responded, asked for his suite on the 18th floor. Without stopping to inquire who was at the other end, he gave his hasty information. I'm over at my hideout, he said. Suite 458, the Maurice Apartments. There's a guy there who's trying to croak me. Get some gorillas over here, quick. There was a response. Then Bodine asked quickly, Who's this? Gus? Another reply came over the wire. Bodine dropped the receiver on the hook. His expression changed. Cliff detected it. Bodine observed his quizzing look. He hastened to explain. It wasn't Gus, he said. It was Joe Cardona. From headquarters. This was unexpected news to Cliff Marsland. He was on the point of commanding Clipper to flee. Now his idea changed. Clipper, in the hands of the police, would be no menace. Should he leave him here for Cardona? Then came another thought. Bodine's surprise seemed genuine enough, but it might be feigned. Perhaps he was thinking the same as Cliff. Maybe he wanted Clipper to be left, to learn the merciless methods of Arnold Bodine's mob. Cliff's hesitation came to an end. As Cliff stood with his back in the hallway, something struck him from behind. A man had entered silently from the corridor. The tap of a pistol butt had settled the question. Cliff Marsland collapsed in a helpless heap. Someone had struck from behind. In his moment of certain victory with the killing of Arnold Bodine thwarted, Cliff Marsland was stunned and at the mercy of his unexpected foeman. Chapter 13. The Shadows Fight. Get him, Clipper! Get Bodine! The hissed command came from the little hallway just behind the prostrate body of Cliff Marsland. There, from the darkness, Sneaks Rubin was speaking. The pasty-faced gangster had arrived at a crucial moment. Leaving nothing to chance, he had followed his two gunmen to make sure that they did the job, and by working from the background, he had ended the plans of Cliff Marsland. Sneaks fired no shot. This was not his job. He had hesitated long before he had followed his hirelings to the door of Bodine's apartment. He had come only because they had not returned to the alley. He had been close enough to Bodine's door to hear the gang chief's last words. Clipper Tobin picked up his automatic, which lay in the center of the room. Sneaks turned. The police were coming, and Sneaks had reasons for wanting to be outside that building. He had delivered his blow and his order in less than 2 seconds. Now he was scurrying down the corridor, the door closed behind him, anxious to be in the fire tower before Arnold Bodine died. The dull report of Clipper's automatic reached the ears of Sneaks Rubin just as the shrewd little crook was crawling into the entrance of the fire tower. He grinned gleefully as he thought of Bodine lying dead. Clipper could not have missed his mark. But Sneaks Rubin thought wrong. Clipper had aimed while picking his gun from the floor. Bodine, who chanced to be unarmed in the security of his hideout, had dropped when the shot was fired. Before Clipper could shoot again, a footstool hurtled across the room. It missed Clipper's head by a close margin. It struck his gun hand instead. The automatic fell from the gangster's numbed fingers. As he scrambled for it, Arnold Bodine leaped toward the same objective. Clipper gained the automatic, but before he could bring it into play, Bodine was struggling with him. Clipper was the stronger. Bodine fought with the desperation of a man who knows that minutes gained will mean rescue. They whirled about the room, Bodine hoping that he could knock the telephone from its table and shout for help. People might arrive from downstairs before Cardona and his squad, but Bodine did not succeed. Gradually, Clipper brought the muzzle of the automatic toward its opponent's body. Shots cracked. They missed. Clipper, enraged, tried to free himself. He fired again, taking hurried aim, and a bullet shattered the glass front of a small bookcase. Then, Bodine, grappling, forced the muzzle of the automatic underneath his own arm. Clipper pressed the weapon upward as he discharged 2 shots in quick succession. One reached its mark. Bodine, crippled, lost his hold. Clipper flung him to the floor. He fired his last 2 bullets into Bodine's heart. Then he stood panting like a fierce beast that had killed its prey. The struggle had carried him to the corner of the room. With a snarl, Clipper jerked open the large window and drank great draughts of fresh air. Turning, he spied Cliff Marsland's helpless form. He aimed his automatic and pressed the trigger. Then he remembered that the gun was empty. He leaped across the room like a wild animal and snatched up the automatic that lay beside Cliff. A sudden leer appeared on Clipper's evil face. He might need every bullet in this gun. Help was coming. Every bullet might be useful, but that could wait. He pocketed the pistol. With a display of prodigious strength, Clipper picked up Cliff's body and carried it to the window. He looked out as he prepared to thrust the body through. The roof of the garage was a trifle to the left. Directly beneath was the blackness of the blind alley. That was where Cliff Marsland would die. Clipper was thrusting the body headforemost. Cliff's head and shoulders were hanging over space. Clipper gripped the victim's waist for the final effort. As his hands lifted upward, a revolver shot sounded from the doorway. Clipper staggered back, his left shoulder limp. The body of Cliff Marsland slumped downward against the wall. the head resting on the windowsill. The timely shot had saved him from a horrible death. A man clad in black was standing in the doorway, a smoking automatic in his gloved hand. His expert shot had picked the one spot on Clipper's body that could have been struck without danger to Cliff Marsland. Clipper dropped to the floor, his automatic dangling in his right hand. He managed to turn his head. "The Shadow," he whispered. He had recognized the Avenger of the Underworld. The tall man with a turned-up cloak and the wide-brimmed slouch hat concealing his face was indeed the strange being of whom Clipper Tobin had often heard. And now he had met the Shadow. Clipper's bulging eyes noted the body of Arnold Bodine. The form of Cliff Marsland was beside him. He had killed one. He was not to be cheated of the other. With a snarl, he seized Cliff's body and twisted himself behind it. He pulled Cliff's loaded automatic from his pocket and pointed it toward the door and fired. His first shot, a hasty one, was wild. The second was well aimed, but the bullet never left the muzzle. Once again, the Shadow's marksmanship prevailed. He had chosen the automatic in Clipper's hand as his target, and his shot proved true. The gun fell from Clipper's stunned claw. The killer was helpless. Even then, Clipper Tobin would not yield. The shrill sound of a police whistle came to his ears. He was defeated in conflict, and captors were approaching. Still, he was determined at least to elude the Shadow. He raised himself and carried Cliff's body up before him as a shield. Wounded as he was, his effort cost the killer energy. The two forms stood there before the window. Now the Shadow advanced, his gun ready for the first vulnerable spot that Clipper might offer. Clipper cursed. If he had realized what was about to happen, he would have shot Cliff before he lost his gun. At least one more enemy would have died with him, but that was too late. Here, however, was another scheme for safety. As the black-clad Shadow came closer, Clipper suddenly flung Cliff's body forward, almost into the arms of the man in black. With a leap, he was through the window with a wide swing. Clipper projected himself toward the roof of the garage 10 feet below. The Shadow caught Cliff Marsland's body with one arm and let it slide gently to the floor. He reached the window and stood there like a gigantic silhouette, staring into the darkness. Reflected lights from the avenue revealed a tragic scene. Clipper's drop had carried him at an angle over the intervening space to the garage roof. He landed there, on the very edge. He was a target for the Shadow, but the man at the window did not fire. Instead, he calmly watched Clipper Tobin struggle against the hand of fate. For Clipper was slipping from his precarious post of safety. His body toppled over the edge. He was fighting to draw himself to the roof, but his crippled arms were unequal to the task. Clipper had signed his own death warrant when he had made that desperate plunge. The force of the 10-foot swing had jarred him. Now his clutching hands were losing their hold. Numbed fingers slipped. With a fearful cry, Clipper Tobin lost his battle and pitched downward into the Stygian depths of the concrete-floored alley. The crash of his body awoke a frightful echo. His death scream floated upward. A deep, sighing groan sounded from the blackness. All was still. The Shadow waited. He heard the sound of footsteps echoing beneath. They did not follow to the spot where Clipper had fallen. They were pounding toward the fire tower. Swiftly, the Shadow whirled across the room and locked the door of the little hallway. The action was none too soon. Already men were entering the outside corridor. Joe Cardona's squad, dispatched to prevent the murder of Arnold Bodine, was already at the doorway of the apartment. The strong door which Bodine had purposely placed at the entrance withstood the pounding of the detective's shoulders. The gruff voice of Joe Cardona was shouting in the corridor. Muffled commands could be heard. Cardona was planning to prevent the escape of the man who had closed the door. In the meantime, the Shadow, a strange form in black, was quietly bending over Cliff Marsland, reviving the unconscious man. Cliff opened his eyes. The Shadow stepped away. Although his head throbbed, Cliff's confusion cleared away rapidly. He did not know who had struck him down. He did not know that the Shadow had come to his rescue. Too late to save Arnold Bodine, however. The body of the big shot lay but a few feet away. There was a lull outside. The attackers were waiting to hear if any sound came from within. A voice called up from the alleyway below. "We're down here, Cardona. There's a dead man here." The silence indicated to the crier that Cardona had not yet forced his way into Bodine's apartment. The beam of a powerful flashlight shone outside the window. The men who had found the body were centering its glare upon the roof of the garage. That means of escape was cut off. Police would soon be there. The words from the alley echoed in Cliff's mind. He realized instantly that the dead man must be Clipper. He wondered what the shadow intended to do. He saw the black-clad form studying the body of Bodine. Was the shadow about to don a disguise, to deceive Cardona and his men into thinking that he was Arnold Bodine? No, that would be helpless. Too many explanations would be necessary. Cliff groaned as he realized that he was a burden on the shadow. He knew that fact as he tried to climb to his feet and sank back weakly. The shadow could escape even if he had to fight his way through the minions of the law, but he would not desert his associate. Leaning against the wall, Cliff watched the shadow. The mysterious man seemed purposeless as he strolled about the room. At last, he stopped by the wall in a front corner of the room and tapped softly. Cliff could hear a laugh from the man in black. There was a terrific pounding from outside. The blows of a sledgehammer resounded against the corridor door. Wood was splintered. Triumphant shouts followed. The police were breaking in. The shadow opened the door of a closet near the corner where he had tapped. He entered. Cliff could see his arm moving up and down. Now the man in black was across the room again, his hands upon the body of Arnold Bodine. Cliff saw the flash of metal as the shadow brought forth a key ring from the dead man's pocket. Once more, the shadow was back in the closet. He emerged and swept toward Cliff. Clutching the black arm that was offered him, Cliff gained his feet. Crash! Cliff heard the thud as the splintered door gave way. The shadow was in the closet, drawing him along. He could hear the shouts of orders from the men who were entering the room. The closet door closed. The powerful clutch of the shadow was beneath Cliff's arms. He was thrust toward the side of the closet. He felt himself descending through the floor. Clutching, he caught the rungs of an iron ladder. He gained a foothold and let himself down a step. Something clicked above. The shadow had closed the secret entrance. Weak though he was, Cliff managed to keep moving downward. He felt a hand supporting him from above. His feet touched a solid floor. He leaned against the wall and waited. He knew that the shadow was standing beside him. They were at the bottom of a short shaft, some 15 feet in depth. Cliff understood it all while he leaned there in the darkness. The shadow, ever alert, had divined that Arnold Bodine would not dwell in a hideout that had but a single exit. The roof of the adjoining garage had been the clue. The space between the closet and the wall served a definite purpose. It was a means whereby Bodine could leave his rooms unseen. The shadow had discovered the lock of the secret door, formed by the wall of the closet. He had obtained the key from Bodine's body. They were on their way to safety. Cliff wondered why the shadow was waiting. He did not believe that his rescuer could be at a loss. Then he realized that the delay was made to give him time to recuperate his strength. "I'm all right," he whispered. "Let's go." A click, and the wall ahead moved outward. A firm hand gripped Cliff's arm. With the shadow, he stepped forward. They were inside the garage on a narrow stairway. The tiny gleam of a flashlight appeared, and Cliff made out the stone flight of steps ahead. Evidently, this was a seldom-used side stairway. They descended while the flashlight showed the way. There were no windows, nothing but stone walls on either side, and a locked door blocked farther passage at the bottom. A black-gloved hand appeared in the light, holding the key ring. The lock was opened. The door moved outward and showed a dim corner of a garage floor. An expensive coupe was standing 10 feet away.
"Get in the car,"
came a whisper. Cliff was steady now. He walked across to the car, opened the door, and entered it.
Then got on the
Resting on
floor,
comfortable
and
cushions,
then
he looked
did
back toward the door
the
through which he had come.
dinosaur.
It was closed now, and it bore the placard, "Air Shaft," in large white letters. Before Cliff realized it, the starter was buzzing. He was surprised to see a man in the driver's seat. The shadow had silently taken his place there. He was no longer a man in black. Cliff could not distinguish his features in the darkness, but noticed that the cloak was gone, and only the slouch hat had remained. The car moved toward the door of the garage. There, a burly policeman stopped it. The man beside Cliff leaned from the window and pulled back the side of his coat. "From headquarters," Cliff heard a gruff voice say. "This is Bodine's car. Cardona told me to bring it around." "All right," came the policeman's response. The car rolled out on the side street. The driver did not speak another word. They traveled on through darkness. Even when they crossed the avenue, Cliff could not glimpse the other man's face in the light, for his head was turned away. The car pulled up in darkness on another side street. 50 feet ahead, Cliff saw the electric sign of the Hotel Metrolite. He understood that this was his destination. He waited a moment. The man beside him made no comment. Cliff opened the door and stepped to the sidewalk. He walked steadily now. When he reached the door of the hotel, he glanced toward the street to see the tail light of Arnold Bodine's coupe flashing toward the next avenue. Once again, the Shadow's daring had overcome all obstacles. A timely rescuer, he had carried Cliff Marsland from the midst of danger, and the escape had been so cleverly contrived that Cardona and his plainclothes men would never know what had occurred. Chapter 14. Double Z Plots. Clyde Burke's story in the next day's classic was read by New Yorkers with avid interest. Arnold Bodine, the big shot who had cloaked himself with respectability, had been murdered in his own apartment. Even the security of a secret hideout had not protected him. That, in itself, was sensational. The fact that the police had received a tip-off from Double Z was amazing. Once again, the name of the arch-murderer was on every tongue. Joe Cardona, calm in the face of criticism, reiterated the fact that Double Z was not responsible for the killing. The police had evidence that pointed to the real slayer. Clyde Burke, as the Wise Owl, suggested the name of Dave Markin. It was the Underworld's general opinion that Markin had engineered the slaying, and the Underworld had a peculiar habit of being right. Popular opinion produced strange results. Cardona's truthful statement that Double Z had merely furnished information and had not been the actual murderer was ridiculed. A few months ago it would have been accepted, but with Double Z classed as the slayer of Joel Calkins and Philip Farmington, anything which carried his name indicated his action. Editorials condemned Joe Cardona for his honest opinion. Even Inspector Timothy Klein, now back on the job, came in for criticism, although he had been absent when Double Z had killed. The exciting events at the apartment of Arnold Bodine had made it hot for Dave Markin. He had ordered the death of the big shot. He had an alibi. Ordinarily, it would have held, but now it was subject to fire. It was obvious that the police would have to round up anyone who might be connected with the affair, purely because the trail might lead to Double Z. That in itself was trouble for Markin. But he was in wrong elsewhere. The underworld was seeing red. Markin's mob was growling at their chief's slip. It was rumored that Arnold Bodine's bodyguards would not let the death go unavenged. There was talk of a fund established secretly by Bodine. In the event that the big shot was murdered, so the tale went, a certain lawyer would pay a large sum to the man who killed the murderer. When the underworld said that gunners were out to get Markin, the underworld meant that very thing. Under all this pressure, Dave Markin showed a yellow streak. He fled from the city. He had planned too boldly. He feared his own mob, Bodine's killers, and the police. Jake Dermott assumed control of the leaderless mob. His apprehension had been changed to realization. Jake was on top of the world. He prided himself upon his secret allegiance to Double Z. Before the print had dried on the final editions of the evening newspapers, another killing took place. Gunshots flashed in a gloomy room where Mike Lombrosi made his headquarters, and Tony Marano became the new leader of that mob. Lombrosi had long been tottering on his throne. He had paid tribute to the dead Arnold Bodine, and rumor had it that he might have supported Dave Markin in the enterprise. So Tony stepped in with a big gat and ended the discussion. The killing took place when several of the mob were present, so Tony did not have to wait long for congratulations. Like Jake Dermott, Tony Marano was pleased with his new connection. Double Z, through Sneaks Rubin, was to be the recipient of the tribute that had once been paid to Arnold Bodine, but that was a matter that Tony intended to keep to himself. Thus, in less than 24 hours, two of the most proficient criminal groups in New York had come beneath the sway of the great unknown, Double Z, and not a word of the change had reached the ever-ready ears of Gangland. Bodine's death was something of a mystery. The first indication had been the note from Double Z.
Yes.
Detective Joe Cardona had put men on guard.
She is
at the
very
London
adorable.
Hotel. Cardona himself had
I am only going
Bodine's
3
rooms. He had answered a telephone
hours.
call. It had been Bodine's cry for help. A slayer was in the big shot's hideout.
I see.
The shooting had commenced.
What
before
time
Cardona
do
had
I go to
arrived.
work
The
tomorrow?
detectives found the door barred.
I
They were
see.
sure someone was in the apartment. In the alley outside,
Let us
men
pray.
sent to guard the flank had discovered the body of Clipper Tobin, a lone wolf in Gangdom. Crashing into Bodine's room, the detective found the body of the big shot, but the slayer was gone. What part had Clipper Tobin played? Cardona doubted he was one of the murderers. It was more likely that Bodine had hired him as a special bodyguard. If so, two men had doubtless entered for the killing. They must have escaped by the window, swinging
So
to the
1
roof of the
o'clock
garage,
is when I
or
go
at
into
least
work
the top
tomorrow.
Before the police had blocked
So I'm
that
gonna go
exit.
till 3.
Logically, these men would be considered as hirelings of Dave Markin. That was Cardona's claim, and had gathered force when Markin made his sudden departure. But the newspapers could not forget Double Z. His name was undeniably linked with the killing. Perhaps he was the actual murderer. Joe Cardona was glum when he conferred with Inspector Timothy Klein. The detective was a man who had his ups and downs. Klein was always the same,
Yeah.
rough and doubtful. He was not pleased with what had happened. He lost no time in saying so. "Rather bungled," was his comment, and the words were no salve to Joe Cardona. "It's this Double Z business," protested the detective. "If they'd lay off and give us a chance. Burke with the classic is shooting straight. But the others—" "Can you blame them?" questioned Klein. "You admitted you got the tip-off, but the killing went through just the same. Who is the guy? Have you any idea?" "Never read anybody like him. He's a mystery." "How about the Shadow?" Klein's question was startling, but it brought a growl of disapproval from Cardona. "The Shadow isn't a killer," he declared. "He's given tip-offs," retorted Klein. "Yes," said Cardona, "but they've been clean ones. I'll tell you what, Inspector, I wish the Shadow was in this." "Why?" "Because we'd be getting some results." "You think he'd help out? He did in the past." "Well," drawled Klein, "maybe the Shadow is in it. Maybe he's changed tactics. Maybe he's Double Z." Cardona shook his head. He had met the Shadow in the past. He had never gained an inkling of the mysterious man's identity, but he felt that he understood the Shadow's methods. "Where is the Shadow?" questioned Klein. "This is the kind of mess he would get into. We haven't heard a word of him. Doesn't that make it look like he might be Double Z?" "You don't know the Shadow, Inspector. If he happened to be back in this playing the part of Double Z, he'd be in the game as himself, just to make it more bewildering. No, the Shadow isn't Double Z. I'll stake my reputation on that." "You won't be staking much," asserted Klein grimly.
Wow.
"Not if this keeps on, you won't." "Listen," replied the detective. "I'll make a prediction. We'll hear from Double Z again, soon, and his next job will be a flop. I hope so."
I
Joe
hope
Cardona paid a
so.
visit to room 909 in the Badger Building. He would have been surprised to observe the actions of an investment specialist named Rutledge Mann, for that quiet-faced individual was dealing in other papers than stocks and bonds. He was clipping accounts of the Bodine killing and the rumor hours which had followed it, he was missing nothing. Among his tabulated statistics were the facts that Mike Lombrosi and Dave Markin were no longer important figures in the realms of gangdom. His notations came from other sources than the actual newspapers. On his desk was an envelope delivered by Clyde Burke when the reporter had stopped by on his way to the Classic office. The wise owl had been getting material. He had been hearing more than rumors from the lips of mobsters. Finishing his work, Rutledge Man pasted up some clippings and stuffed them in an envelope. He dropped them in the office marked B. Jonas while en route to the Cobalt Club. After a heavy dinner, Man lighted a cigar and strolled about. Once again, the plutocrats were discussing Double Z. "The man's a maniac," he heard Barnaby Hotchkiss say. "Dangerous. It's outrageous the way the police continue to fail. Why, we're all in danger. First Farmington was
A
killed, now
maniac,
Bodine."
a maniac.
"No analogy there," declared Blaine Glover. "One was a banker, the other a crook. Both had money. But this man called Double Z did not profit thereby," Glover persisted. "How can you tell? I assert that no one's safe. He will strike again, and one of us may be the victim." "That would be interesting," commented Matthew Wade. "I hope it isn't worrying you, Hotchkiss." "Just as much cause for you to worry, Wade," came the reply. "You're no safer than any of the rest of us. I tell you again, the man is out to make trouble. He has a mania that causes him to attack those who have wealth, no matter how they may have acquired it." A murmur of agreement followed. Even Glover admitted that Hotchkiss might be correct in theory. Wade seemed non-committal. Rutledge Man noted that Lamont Cranston was in the group, but silent. He went along to the library. When he returned, Cranston was gone. A few hours later, Man stopped back at his new office. He found a letter on the floor. He opened it and read it quickly. The writing faded away, but Man had perused the entire coded message. He sat by his desk and softly repeated the words that he had just read. "Jake Dermott," he said. "Jake Dermott and Tony Morano. That's right. Burke said they were only gunmen, not typical gang leaders. Marsland must be cautious. But if he can follow Dermott, he may gain information. Burke must be posted too. Vincent on the usual job. No results as yet." None of these thoughts had occurred to Man when he had forwarded his data to the Shadow. But since then, the Double Z problem had been studied by the Shadow. Man knew that the mastermind had been at work, for he had just become acquainted with the findings. Facts that Cardona had never suspected were seen by the Shadow's keen vision. "Cliff Marsland's report," murmured Man. Here he was, on a trail which Cardona had not even seen. Who set Clipper Tobin on the job? Does that man know Marsland? Well, Marsland can trace back Tobin's actions. Perhaps he may discover their source. Somewhere in New York, a man sat in a small darkened room, a pair of earphones clamped to his head, a mouthpiece before him. He was at one end of a conversation. At the other end, in the back room of a secluded dive, sat Sneaks Rubin. The pale-faced gangster with the fang-like teeth was talking with his master, Double Z. To Sneaks, Double Z was no more than a voice, but he dreaded that voice to the depths of his evil heart. In this conversation, Sneaks was pouring out all he knew, and his words told of a looming danger. For Sneaks Rubin had not been inactive during the exciting moments that had followed his departure from Arnold Bodine's apartment. "Clipper was double-crossed," he was saying. "The guy that went with him on the job was a phony."
What was his name?
The question came in a deliberate, monotonous voice. It was that same singleness of tone that had constantly perplexed Sneaks Rubin. "I don't know who he was," admitted the gangster. "Clipper figured he was okay."
You did not follow my instructions,
said the accusing voice.
I told you to obtain a reliable man.
"Clipper said he was reliable,"
That is not sufficient.
came the interruption to the protest.
You should have been positive from your own observation.
"I played it safe, Chief," said Sneaks. "I tagged along to see that the job was done. When I got to Bodine's, I found this guy had covered Clipper. I stepped in back of him and cracked him. That gave Clipper the chance to plug Bodine.
Then, what happened?
I don't know. I scrammed. I heard Clipper shoot. I run down the fire tower. I waited at the bottom, then Clipper falls out the window.
What about the man you struck? Was he unconscious?
I knocked him cold. It was some other guy that heaved Clipper out. That's why I'm worried, Chief. This other guy must have come in after I was gone, and I know who he was. The Shadow. Sneaks blurted the fearsome name in a hoarse whisper. He listened intently, wondering what the response would be, but the voice of Double Z betrayed no emotion.
How do you know it was the Shadow?
When I see Clipper flop in the alley, I slides up to him. He was pretty near gone, Chief. But he knew who I was when I spoke. He says, "The Shadow got me. The Shadow. Get him, Sneaks." Then he passes out. I didn't wait no longer. I got away just a few minutes before the cops show up.
What do you know about the Shadow?
Nothing, Chief. That's the worst of it. I figured he had this guy fixed. The guy that was with the Clipper. There was silence. Then
People.
Double Z spoke slowly.
Ain't shit changed. Looks like all is well, goat. Okay.
I don't know how to find him, Chief.
There is one.
Yeah. Looks like all is well. All is well.
But if I don't find him...
At 3 o'clock.
Find him. He will find you.
The suggestion brought a shudder to Sneaks.
When he finds you,
Resumed Double Z.
lead him to Loy Rooks.
I can get Jake Dermott to bump him off.
I need no suggestions.
Reprimanded Double Z.
I order you obey. Lead him to Rooks. He will be captured there. We do not want him dead.
But he double-crossed Clipper,
He shall die for that.
announced the voice.
His death will come later, when he has been captured at Loy Rooks.
There's the question.
For you may be sure of this, the Shadow came to his rescue once before. The Shadow will come again.
There was a click. The earphones and mouthpiece were laid aside in the darkened room. Sneaks Rubin, his mouth gaping as he understood the scheme, sat at the end of a dead wire. His orders had been received. He would hear no more from his master tonight. "I'll find the guy," muttered Sneaks with a malicious grin. "Find him by letting him find me. Then it's curtains for him, and the Shadow." The scrawny gangster was confident as he sauntered from the dive to keep an appointment with Tony Marano. The Shadow, scourge of the underworld, was to meet his match. Double Z had plotted, and Double Z would win.
And Double Z would win. And Double Z would...
Chapter 15, at Loy Rooks. The
And
office of
Double
Loy
Z
Rooks
would...
was located in the York of Chinatown. There was nothing oriental about it. It might have been
I am losing brain cells. I will probably be playing my game afterwards anyway, like just to wind fucking down. Because I'm not gonna go to bed immediately, or I might go to bed immediately. I just know that if I go to bed, I'm just going to bed. I want to play my game.
There were living quarters on the second floor where
But I know me. I will sleep until tomorrow.
Loy Rook's own suite was on the third floor. It was furnished in Chinese style. Thus, Loy Rook stepped downstairs from a home that might have been in Peiping and entered an office that was obviously in New York. Loy Rook was in his office today, the day after Gangdom had undergone its shakeup. He was going over certain important affairs, and he paused from consideration of a pile of papers to call his secretary. "Can you come here a moment, Vincent?" he said. Harry Vincent arose from a desk in the corner. He approached Loy Rook and helped him sort the papers. The old Chinaman looked on admiringly. This man was the first good secretary he had ever had. The gods had been wise when they had prompted Ching Fu, Loy Rook's very good friend, to recommend this secretary. Loy Rook was always ready to hire a new man. He wanted one who liked to work, whose salary demands were low, and who was willing to live on the second floor of his building. Harry Vincent had answered all those demands. Wait a minute, said Loy Rook in his queerly enunciated English. Do not go back to work just yet. Let us talk. Harry resumed his seat and looked at the old bespectacled Mongolian. You like it here? I find it very pleasant. That is good. You would like to travel to China, perhaps? I prefer New York, but Harry paused. Not now, said Loy Rook hastily. Not for a long time yet, perhaps, but I have much to do with China. You know that, from the work you have done for me. I will need someday a man like yourself to go there. I'll be ready. China is a wonderful country, declared Loy Rook. A very wonderful place. When I, Loy Rook, say that, it is because I understand. These Chinese in New York, they do not know their native land. When they wish to find out how things are done in China, where do they come? To Loy Rook. Harry nodded. That is why I tell you about my Chinese friends. They may ask you many things, but that I do not tell them. I have my own reasons for that. But when I speak to you of them and tell you of what they ask, it is because I wish you to understand how the Chinese think. You see? Harry nodded again. There is none so wise as Loy Rook, said the Chinaman solemnly.
Chatter.
Perhaps Ching Fu has said that also? He said words to that effect. Yet Loy Rook is not wise. He has simply remembered what he has seen.
Alright.
He has seen much.
I'm tired.
This impersonal
I
manner
am
of
genuinely
talking was a
just
familiar
tired.
trait of Loy Rook's.
I'm not getting a lot of
He
work
adopted it when
done.
speaking
I'm
of
just
himself.
kind
There is
of
much that is known in China,
looking at
declared
this
Loy Rook.
page and being like,
Much that is
okay,
not
what
known
needs to
in
be
New
done
York.
next and all
He
that.
laughed. But there are people here who think they know much. When there is something to be learned that is not known here, those
I
who
got
are
3
wise
hours
come
done.
to Loy Rook. With his cryptic remark, the old Chinaman
Things are
busied
getting
himself with
done.
the papers that Harry had
One
arranged. Harry
day
went
at a
back to his
time.
work. He was thoughtful.
Alright.
At last, he was making progress, even though it was not much. He was here at the Shadow's
Let's
bidding,
see.
for the Shadow was certain that through Loy Rook, the key to Philip Farmington's murder could be discovered. The poison, Li Shun, was known only in Mongolia, of which Loy Rook was a native. Loy Rook, ostensibly a prosperous merchant, loved money too well not to take part in shady dealings. So Harry had been posted here through some mysterious arrangement between the Shadow and Ching Fu, the man who was a friend of Loy Rook's. Harry's present job was to keep a watchful eye. Ching Fu had suavely told him of Loy Rook's peculiarities. One was that every visitor, no matter what his purpose might be, entered Loy Rook's office
I have
to
not
meet him.
given Trevor
The Mongolian was too canny to overdo his
any
crooked
love,
work.
so I'll give
He made
Trevor. I
everyone
will
meet him
send
in what
them that.
appeared to be an above-board transaction. At least, that was supposed to be the case. So Harry had been informed. To date, he had seen nothing to the contrary. So far, results were a blank. Loy Rook occasionally talked in English. Occasionally, he indulged in Chinese conversation with visitors. On those occasions, Harry was at a disadvantage. Nevertheless, he was always alert in case something suspicious might take place. It was nearly noon when a young Chinaman entered the office and demanded to see Loy Rook. Harry's employer was out.
Alright guys, thank you guys for being good. Thank you guys for being awesome. Have a good one. We will see you later. Stay out of trouble, everybody. Keep it real. I will see you tomorrow. Usual time. Hopefully I won't be as tired. Stay frosty, my friends. Stay enjoyable. I'll see you guys later. So, bye-bye.